Chapter 1421. The elemental guardians advanced like a hurricane. At this moment, the temple gate, which had been silent for a while, suddenly flashed with a brighter and more resplendent light. Countless elemental light balls jumped out from the translucent illusory ends of the weave, and then gathered together. First, a huge elemental heart appeared out of thin air under the protection of magic runes that were flying back and forth. Thump, thump. Accompanied by a strong pulse, the energy materialized with fire elements as the dominant energy, constructing the thick arteries and veins of the heart, as well as other internal organs. Then, illusory dark brown bones appeared, and rows of ribs protected the newly emerged internal organs well. The next step was the limbs that still retained the characteristics of insects. Then came the tendons and muscles, layers of what looked like biological substances, but were actually elemental muscles covered the bones composed of high-density elements, giving the body the ability to move. Finally came the skin and bright red armor. Everything seemed to be the perfect interpretation of 3D printing technology. Not only was it done perfectly, but it was also done extremely quickly. In just 2 seconds, 2 3-story tall, seemingly thin giants appeared. Haha. I didn't expect us brothers to regain our bodies so soon. Although it's temporary, it's still great. Right. The ones who appeared here were Duke's number 1 and number 2 thugs, the Karaji twin emperors. Insignificant Naga Vaskia who overestimates her capabilities. Are you ready to face the wrath of our Lord, Duke Marcus? A thunderous voice reverberated over the entire Serpent Temple. At this moment, the roaring roar had turned into a violent tremor that affected the entire space. One must know that the bottom of the entire Serpent Temple was basically water, and only a large pile of wooden and metal buildings on the surface of the water could allow terrestrial creatures to pass through. If they fell into the water, they would attract countless piranhas at any time and devour the unlucky ones who fell into the water. But now the declaration of the twin emperors directly caused the entire space to shake. It was not just the water beneath the temple. Every building, every pillar, and even every plank of wood seemed to be emitting a deep and ancient sound. They hummed again and again, turning into a unified sound, responding to the declaration of the 2 emperors. The water at the bottom of the serpent shrine was surging, because the deeper water was also rumbling and shaking, because countless Karaji worms were rushing out of the illusory weave. As soon as they came out, the elements materialized and became strange existences that seemed like real life. They responded to the Emperor's call, and performed a shocking feat: throw, whip, break, flow. Before I transmigrated, during the Taiyuan era of Emperor Xiaowu of the Eastern Jin dynasty, Fujian of the former Qin dynasty unified the north, and decided to mobilize 1 million troops to destroy the Eastern Jin dynasty, and unify the whole of China. At that time, the Emperor's most arrogant words were, "Now I have nearly 1 million troops. Just throwing the horsewhip into the Yangtze River is enough to cut off the river flow. Why should I be afraid of natural hazards?" The current scene was actually not inferior to the legendary, cutting off the flow with a whip. The insects the size of small tanks madly rushed into the water, one after another, like martyrs committing mass suicide. If it was a normal creature, at the moment of death, perhaps it would hesitate. But they were not. Not to mention that they were already materialized elemental creatures. Even when they were alive, the spiritual connection between the insects and their nature of absolute obedience would drive them to complete their master's orders without hesitation, even if they were told to die. So what if they were attacked and bitten by the piranhas? So what if they felt suffocated and uncomfortable? They almost madly rushed into the water, paddling and rushing with their chelicerae that were not adapted to underwater movement. Even if they could not sink, it did not matter. More of their insect brethren would press down on them from above. If anyone could overlook the entire serpent shrine at this moment, they would find that there was a large mass of ink black spreading in the water at the entrance of the shrine. That was the Karaji insect people carrying out the task of cutting off the flow with a whip. With their enormous bodies and absolute numbers, they easily filled up the body of water in front of the twin emperors that was tens of meters deep, more than 20 meters wide, and more than 300 meters long, forming an insect dam that was hard for bystanders to imagine. "Let's go. My elder brother. Let's go." My younger brother. The two familiar faces under the visors seemed to be smiling. The twin emperors' thin and huge bodies took giant strides, as if they were mirror images of each other. One took a step with his left leg, the other with his right leg, and they walked together onto the black carpet that only belonged to the Kuraji Emperor. Instead of stepping directly on the insects, the two of them stepped on the elements floating in the void. To put it bluntly, the insect bridge was not a necessity from the beginning to the end. Perhaps this was what it meant to be pretentious. Duque, who was far away in Karazhan, bared his teeth and complained, "Damn, my subordinates actually think that I can pretend?" Beside him, there was the light laughter of several women that sounded like silver bells. The aura of the twin emperors did not matter. Anyway, the strong men under them, no matter how good they could fight, only carried the name of their boss. For the next scene, Duque's mood was very calm. Countless Naga took their weapons and swayed their long snake tails, attempting to surround and attack the twin emperors. At this moment, two majestic, terrible, and ancient auras rose from the twin emperors. The Naga's expressions changed drastically, and they raised their weapons to resist these two auras, but two invisible forces suddenly swept across the entire space, forcibly suppressing all the Naga. This was no longer a matter of being unable to move an inch. This was simply a mandatory law. Without the permission of the twin emperors, let alone raising a sword or a gun, they could not even twitch a muscle. The Naga's bodies were stiff, and they sank to the bottom of the water in this ridiculous way. Why was it ridiculous? Because they were not even allowed to breathe with their cheeks. This scene, let alone the Naga themselves, even any of the leaders in the Serpent Shrine could not believe it. Unable to breathe. Unable to resist. The difference in rank was like the difference between heaven and earth. And even looking up was not enough to see the difference, let alone overturn it. At this moment, a cold aura spread from the depths of the Serpent Shrine. Soon, the cold turned into blazing heat. The entire eastern part of the shrine lit up with the flash of thunder, forming a distinct echo with the elemental brilliance of the twin emperors at the main entrance to the west. An elegant female voice sounded. "Oh hee. My shrine has never had any decent guests, and I didn't expect two demigods to come. Duke Marcus really thinks highly of me." Chapter 1422. Following Vasht's voice, the Nagas who had been suppressed by the twin emperors immediately felt as if they had been granted amnesty. Their forcibly stopped breathing resumed, and their forbidden heartbeats also resumed. Every Naga greedily took a deep breath, letting the cold lake water pass through their cheeks so that oxygen could re-enter their blood vessels. At this time, Carathrus's magic voice also sounded in Vasht's ears. "Your Majesty, I, Carathrus, will immediately return to escort you. No need, all of you attack the Alliance's fortress in the ruins of the Twin Towers." "Your Majesty," but Vasht was obviously sullen. "Idiot. Haven't you discovered the key to the enemy yet? The enemy can descend two powerful demigods. The key is that magic prism. Mobilize all combat power, destroy it." This anger was not only directed at Carathrus, but also at herself. Before this, she really could not imagine that relying on the incomparably huge magic transmission and the souls of two genuine demigods, it was actually possible to project demigod-level combat power across the stars. The most disgusting thing was that unless she had the special skill to annihilate souls, as long as Duque's magic did not run out, even if her strength was above the other party, she could only desperately deal with the twin emperor's fierce attacks over and over again. Moreover, was her strength really stronger than the twin emperor's? Unknowingly, a bean-sized drop of sweat dripped down from Vasht's temple. Of course, the most important thing in a battle between peerless experts was momentum. Whoever showed fear first, then there was no need to fight. They could just directly surrender. Vasht's faint laughter once again echoed in the sky above the Serpent Shrine Temple. "There's no fun in slaughtering the weak. Come, experts from Azeroth, I, Queen Vasht, am waiting for you here on the throne." The twin emperors laughed. "Lead the way." Even if the emperors had bowed their noble knees to Duque, the pride and reserve in their hearts had never been reduced in the slightest. Of course, they could slaughter all the Nagas who approached them, but if it was not necessary, it was a kind of helplessness and humiliation to have their hands stained with the blood of the weak. The metal platform in front of them made an ear-piercing sound, and the metal pillars that were supposed to be permanent buildings began to change shape and move under Vasht's mysterious power, turning into bridge piers. The crooked platform straightened at this moment, turning into a smooth path that led straight to the Queen's Hall. The twin emperors leaned back, and a large bug appeared out of thin air behind each of them. The thrones fixed on the bugs' backs caught them perfectly. The insect mount moved its scythe-like long black legs and quickly ran towards Vasht's throne. Vasht's throne was located in the easternmost hall of the Divine Temple, sitting on a high platform built of 27 steps. The entire platform was surrounded by a circle of green water. If a mortal came here, they would first have to face the endless stream of water elementals, nagas, swamp striders and other powerful aquatic creatures in the green water. Only then would they be able to step onto the terrifying platform. Today the throne was quiet. There was only a pool of green water that was level with the throne's platform. Even the platform was submerged in water. If a human stood on a high platform, they would have to face knee-deep water. The twin emperors came down from the beetle. The depth of the water was barely above their ankles. Welcome to the Serpent Shrine Temple, the Kiraji twin emperors Vek, Lor and Vek Linalas. A subtle smile appeared on Vasht's face, and at the same time, she spread out her 6 seemingly petite arms. We have brought the ultimatum of our lord, Duke Marcus. Surrender or perish. The twin emperors echoed each other. The Naga Queen's 3 opponents showed different situations. The opponent at the bottom had his hands on his hips, and the one in the middle was holding the elbows of the opponent above. Vasht's long hair had turned into a terrifying living snake twisting its body left and right, spitting out its tongue continuously. Vasht's exquisite face revealed a playful smile. Violent fellows. Are you really the subordinates of Duke Marcus who did not hesitate to let go of his great enemy, the Horde, and prioritized fighting against the Burning Legion? If the Insect Emperor's political wisdom is only at this level, I will be very disappointed. The twin emperors were a little confused. After all, the Kiraji insect people generally used a more direct way of thinking. The nature of obeying the strong was branded in the depths of their souls. Thus, even the twin emperors could not understand Vasht's deeper meaning. Vasht continued to speak to herself. Women are never creatures who like to be at a disadvantage. Ayaya. You still need to train your thoughts on women. The twin emperors were not annoyed. Send whoever is suitable to do what? This is a compulsory lesson for those in power. If we try our best and still fail, it proves that the enemy is beyond our master's imagination, or that our master has made a wrong choice. From beginning to end, there is only one thing we have to do. That is to deal with you. Vasht's lips curved into a playful smile. If I meet you in other places, I probably won't be able to do anything about it. But here, in this world full of water, you little frogs who haven't even removed your tails clean want to deal with me. A snake woman. Isn't that too arrogant? After saying that, Vasht's 6 arms popped out a burst of brilliance at the same time. And in the blink of an eye, her 6 arms were full of weapons. The top pair of arms each held a magic wand. A longbow engraved with countless complex magic patterns appeared in the middle hand on her left. The bottom pair of arms took out a pair of daggers with a typical night elf style. It was not an exaggeration to say that she was almost armed to the teeth. With a flash, Vasht, who should have been on the weaker side, took the initiative to attack. Asterisk swoosh swoosh swoosh. Whoosh. Asterisk there were clearly 7 arrows in a row, but the first 3 arrows were fierce and incomparably violent, and the intense lightning dazzled the twin emperors so much that they could not open their eyes. However, it was the last 4 arrows that truly caused them to lose their lives. Each arrow was like a shadow brought out by the first 3 arrows, silently making a strange arc and sinking into the water in front of Vasht, not even stirring up a splash. In the end, they shot out of the water behind Emperor Vek, Lor in an incomparably abrupt manner, fiercely shooting towards Emperor Vek, Lor's waist. Everything was perfect, but unfortunately, she had chosen the wrong target for her sneak attack. As the Demon Emperor, Vek Lor was immune to physical attacks. Asterisk clang 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 clang. Asterisk tisk. Even if it was not a direct feedback, Vasht had already realized that he actually had the trait of physical immunity. This discovery made Vashti rather unhappy. As she launched her attack on the Demon Emperor, the Twin Emperor's counterattack came as expected. The Demon Emperor's gift was a shadow arrow, so thick that it could be used as the mast of a cruiser. The Sword Emperor's counterattack was a fierce forward slash, and with a forceful stomp of his left foot, his huge body had already crossed a distance of 50 meters. Warlord waved the huge Kyra Emperor sword and with incredible agility, launched a triple slash. Chapter 1423. Cha-cha-cha. The three swords formed a Z shape in the air. In the end, the Sword Emperor's three swords had no special technique to speak of. It was like a slash from any skilled swordsman. If there was anything special about it, it was fast. Too fast for the eyes to follow. Insanely fast. It was completely unexpected that such a huge body had agility that surpassed most hero-level thieves. If one could not dodge in time, then Vashti would likely turn into snake pieces on the spot, and be used to make snake soup. If it was a demigod, they would have already been hit. It must be known that if the twin emperors abandoned their integrity and focused on fighting 2 against 1, it would be very shameless. One was immune to magic, the other was immune to physical, and they could both use heal brothers. Regardless of whether they could defeat them or not, just resisting them was already very difficult. Because in a small area, the 2 brothers could completely cover for each other, and use their own characteristics to forcefully take the opponent's moves. It was like a magic attack, and the Sword Emperor took it head-on. What would you do? Although their lives were connected, you had to first attack with the right posture, method. This required their enemy to be more versatile. It just so happened that Vashti was such a demigod who practiced both magic and martial arts. In the face of 3 consecutive slashes, Wuxia did not even think. She twisted her true water snake waist. Her arms were either raised or retracted, turning her body and limbs into a beautiful S shape. The Kiraji Emperor sword flashed in front of her, and beside her with a cold glint. The timing was so ingenious that it did not seem like a life and death battle, but more like a master and disciple feeding each other moves. The moment she avoided the greatsword, Vashti's counterattack came. The gorgeous longbow was raised almost at 0 distance. The middle right hand pulled the string and 3 arrows were about to be shot. Under normal circumstances, Vecnala should have pressed forward and attacked before Vashti pulled the bow. Unfortunately, Vashti did not only have a pair of hands. The arm holding the dagger through the thief skill, fan of knives at Vecnala's. Not 2. Instead, it was dozens of epic daggers that formed a perfect arc in the air. They pierced through the air like the howl of death, as they pierced toward Vecnas. Even if it was an AoE attack, the attack power would not be too high. All Vashti wanted was a split second of separation. Vecnala's couldn't hide even if he wanted to. After all, how could it be that easy to dodge a demigod powerhouse's attack? The Sword Emperor frowned and could only take a step back to avoid the fan of sabers, allowing the terrifying power of the blades to pass right in front of him. The moment he stopped, Vashti had already finished drawing her bow. 3 sharp arrows were shot out from a place not much further than 0 distance. The Sword Emperor was indeed the Sword Emperor. The Kila Emperor sword slanted, and the 2 lightning bolts were knocked away. Because the Sword Emperor was immune to magic, the lightning was unable to harm the Sword Emperor at all. He tilted his head and dodged the 3rd arrow. The Sword Emperor had thought that this was the full extent of the attack, but that was not the case. Before he realized it, the Demon King Warlord had already unknowingly appeared behind him. Vashti, the Sword Emperor, and the Demon Emperor happened to form a line. The lightning bolts that should have been shot away actually drew a small arc in the air, and shot towards the Demon Emperor's face. This time, the twin emperors were finally shocked. They completely did not expect that the arrows that seemed to be shot away could still attack a second time. Especially when the lightning contained in the arrows completely surpassed the Demon Emperor's natural resistance. If this kind of demigod-level attack really hit, the Demon Emperor would definitely be heavily injured. Warlord had no choice but to stop his next magic attack, and use his staff to summon an even more powerful magic shield to block in front of his face. But Vashti's continuous attack was not over yet. No one noticed that her long snake tail had actually grown longer without a sound. Just as the Demon Emperor blocked that arrow, The snake tail was like a noose, accurately and ruthlessly wrapping around the Demon Emperor's right foot. With a twist of the snake's waist, the Demon Emperor's huge body flew out and was forcibly smashed into the deep pool beside the throne. It was true that Warlord was immune to physical attacks, and this kind of attack would not hurt him, but this did not mean that he would not be sent flying. It was only at this moment that Vasht's opponent's wand-wielding arm released a powerful magic, defeating the shadow arrow that had been released by the Demon Emperor, but had lost its master's control. Vasht had won the first round. In Karazhan, the women around Duque gasped when they saw this scene. Vasht. So strong. Jaina's face was ashen, but she had to admit this fact. If she and Vasht were to fight one-on-one, she probably would not even be able to last half a round. This was not just a difference in rank, but also a difference in combat experience and fighting style. Vasht had not yet released any big moves, and just by relying on the perfect magic and martial attack combination, she had beaten the demigod duo of the twin emperors into quite a bit of a disadvantage. Duque smiled bitterly. This multi-attack thing is really a talent. If multicast could be barely achieved with hard work, then multi-attack, which could face multiple opponents of the same level without fear, was really impossible to train. Duque suddenly felt a little fervent in his heart. If Vasht is really Selena and is willing to follow me, and I can deal with Jaina, then isn't that, now? Duque did not have too much time to let his imagination run wild. After all, he and Selena were not like Tyrant who had hooked up long ago. Even if they were fated, it was an ill-fated relationship from 10,000 years ago. Before continuing this relationship, it was better to do things according to the standards of both sides. In the magic mirror, the second round had already begun. The Demon Emperor, who had been thrown far away, was just about to climb out of the water when he encountered a few unexpected small troubles. Originally, Vasht would summon a few swamp striders on the throne platform. These things had bodies that looked extremely like jellyfish, with flying saucer-shaped bodies and long legs like long tentacles. Unexpectedly, because no one attacked the other few core areas of the Kolifong Reservoir, Vasht caught the leaders of the few core areas of the reservoir as able-bodied men. The Black Strider was a leader of the Striders with strange abilities. It used its superpower to directly lift the Demon Emperor Warlord who had jumped out of the water. This levitation was very similar to the priest's levitation, but it had characteristics that transcended magic. Warlord could cast spells and attack, but he could not control his body to float high off the ground, to a height of more than 200 meters, and almost hit the ceiling of the Serpent Shrine Cavern. Chapter 1424. The lightning arrows of the Black Strider and the various spells of the Nephilim Emperor clashed in the air like a fireworks battle. Neither side caused any damage to the other, but bought time for Vasht. On the other side, Vasht was actually suppressing the Sword Emperor. It had to be said that having more arms was a bunker. As soon as she saw the Demon Emperor being forced away, Vasht quickly replaced the weapons in her arms with two longswords, and directly pressed forward to force the Sword Emperor into close combat. If it was an ordinary battle, the Sword Emperor dared to say that he wouldn't lose to any opponent of the same level. The point was that Vasht's multiple attacks were too disgusting. 6 arms and a long tail that appeared and disappeared mysteriously was fine, but even her hair was an incomparably sharp weapon. 70 or 80 snake hairs meant 70 or 80 deadly venomous snakes. If it was just a simple venomous snake, the Sword Emperor wouldn't be afraid at all, because he was no longer an ordinary creature, but an elemental creature through and through. As it happened, these venomous snakes had been adjusted by Vasht. Even if it was a legendary hero-level warrior, if his equipment wasn't up to standard, he would probably fall on the spot. There were so many venomous snakes, and each of them simply arched their body before suddenly shooting out to bite the Sword Emperor. Because the movements of the snakes were really too fast, they actually created a shadow similar to a machine gun firing. What kind of fighting style was this? The Sword Emperor used a great sword, and couldn't display this kind of fast and fierce attack at close range. In just less than a second of fierce attack, the twin emperors' HP dropped by a full 10th. Admittedly, they were now elemental creatures, and as long as the weave had enough elemental magic supply, they wouldn't die. Of course, they could use the method of exchanging blows and wasting HP to win against Vashj. But if they had a choice, they definitely wouldn't use this method. If they couldn't defeat Vashj within her original HP, and in a situation where it was 2 against 1, that would be their failure. The pride in their hearts wouldn't allow them to fight this kind of ugly victory. In addition, they sensitively discovered that Duque didn't seem to want to kill Vashj, which further stimulated their nerves. This was their first battle after pledging allegiance to Duque. If they couldn't win beautifully, even if it wasn't Vashj, other demigods would join in the future. Then where would they stand? The twin emperors were telepathic. At the same time, the two emperors launched their attacks. The Nephilim king raised his hand, and a fire elemental that looked like Ragnaros appeared out of thin air in front of him. However, it didn't have a fire demon hammer. Instead, it had 2 blazing claws, each of which was the size of a round table. The fire elemental giant slammed its claws on the ground. A circle of flames spread out from the center of the fire elemental palm. The originally incomparably damp Coliphong throne was suddenly surrounded by a cloud of blazing steam. Under the high temperature and heat, water vapor appeared in the blink of an eye. Soon after, the entire platform turned into a world of flames that burned with specks of red sparks. At this moment, the fire elemental was not just on fire. The 5-story tall Black Strider was already huge enough, but now, the fire elemental's body was rapidly expanding. It was almost 4 times the size of the Black Strider. Its huge body almost filled the entire Coliphong throne. As it launched its attack, the flames on both sides of its body even scorched the ceiling above the throne and the easternmost wall. The Black Strider, which was originally considered a mini-boss, let out a terrible cry under its barbaric charge. It then turned into charcoal and was finally swallowed by the flames. It was as if it was the fuel that made this blazing world of flames even more violent. Oh, Vashj was not surprised or angry. Instead, she laughed coldly. In this underwater space that was filled with water in all directions, the other party actually dared to play with fire with her? Was it tired of living? Or was it courting death? Without any hesitation, the huge wall behind Vashj's throne suddenly let out a loud kacha sound. Then the entire wall shattered with a loud bang. In the huge hole that was the size of a football field, thousands of tons of seawater gushed in every second. The fire elemental world just now was naturally destroyed by the even more terrifying nature. Gurgle! Gurgle! The fire elemental giant that was still baring its fangs and brandishing its claws just a moment ago. When it opened its mouth and actually spouted out bubbles, everything was over. In the water level that was rapidly rising visible to the naked eye, in the water world that was almost filled with raging waves, Vashj swayed her long dark green snake tail. The bow and arrow in her hand had already been replaced by a glittering golden trident. I originally didn't want to use this move to bully you so early. Unfortunately, you're too insensible, actually using flames in my water world. A clear voice that was like a wind chime was full of demonic teasing. If it was on land, Vashj would have suffered a crushing defeat at any moment. But this was the bottom of the water that was nearly 1,000 meters deep. No matter how powerful the Kiraji twin emperors were, even with the support of the magic net, could they still evaporate the Viper Lake that was hundreds of square kilometers in an instant? Then they would not be demigods, but absolute true gods with Draenor's divinity. Unfortunately, in this broken world, where would the true gods come from? Vashj had thought that she would see a look of shock and anger on the faces of the twin emperors. She was disappointed. The Sword Emperor Vecnales raised his sword. The Demon Emperor Lor stood with his hands behind his back. Their behavior was definitely not normal. Sure enough, in the next second, Vashj suddenly discovered that the water temperature had changed. It was a high-speed drop, as if falling off a cliff. At first, it was just ice shards mixed in the water, but in the blink of an eye, everything in sight began to freeze. The pool surrounding the high platform of the throne, the elite subordinates led by the Black Strider, the hard high platform. Then the rising water level caused the surrounding ice walls to become taller and taller, pointing straight at the dome of the Viper Shrine that was more than 200 meters high. The Twin Emperor's goal was actually to freeze the entire Viper Shrine? This time, it was Vashj's turn to be shocked. Magic and martial arts dual cultivation? Sounds good. The Sword Emperor sneered. It's just that no matter which one, you're not at the peak. The Demon Emperor also sneered. You can suppress me in close combat. Your natural magic attainments are also above mine. But, although you're a water master on the surface, your true strength is only in nature, not ice. The Demon Emperor hit the nail on the head. Vashti's expression finally changed. It was true that she was an intellectual hero, but she also had extraordinary magic attainments. Unfortunately, that was only in nature, which was mainly thunder. She was not a mage in the traditional sense. Perhaps she could suppress the Demon Emperor in nature, but when it came to water, she was not as good as Warlord. The Demon Emperor had dug a big hole for her to jump into. Chapter 1425. In the world of Warcraft, perhaps a patch made a god. Among so many professions, mages had always had the reputation of smashing their own children. Why? It was because of the infinite possibilities of shaping magic, which gave mages a lot of control and field control skills. No matter what kind of harsh situation it was, Pharaoh could always find the corresponding magic to deal with the enemy. Now Vashti was in a situation where she was at a disadvantage because her magic was too singular. In terms of one-on-one battles, since 10,000 years ago, Vashti, who had become a Naga, had always been in intrigue or various battles. It was impossible to know when she began to abandon Queen Azhara to go solo. It could only be inferred from the results that the blood and sweat that Vashti had paid to become the Naga whose power was second only to Queen Azhara's was absolutely unimaginable. That was not choosing a genius among a group of mentally retarded people, but a bloody path through a large group of insidious and cunning compatriots with powerful spellcasting abilities. Therefore, whether it was combat level or experience, Vashti was definitely above any of the twin emperors. After all, for more than 20,000 years, the Karaji insect people had basically been in a sealed state, or the War of the Shifting Sands had only let them show their heads, and they were sealed again. The pampered twin emperors were really not Vashti's opponent when they were separated. With the two brothers added together, it was a completely different matter. With the Sword Emperor's cover, the Demon Emperor could cast spells safely. Looking at the ice around her, Vashti immediately realized that her situation was not good. The Logia's thunder element was much thinner. It was easy to explain from a scientific point of view. Any water with impurities was a good conductor because there were a large number of freely moving trace ions in the water. It was these ions of a certain concentration that under a certain voltage, usually very small, the positive and negative ions in the water would move in a certain direction, so the electric current would be generated. When the voltage was not high or normal, if there were no other impurities in the ice or it had not been polluted, generally speaking, it could be understood that ice did not conduct electricity, but if the ice had been polluted or encountered a very strong high voltage, it could still conduct electricity. The insulator that people usually talked about was relative. Even insulating plastic, when it encountered an extremely high voltage, would still conduct electricity. Now Vashti was in such a situation. If she forced herself to use thunder, it was not impossible, but the power would drop a lot, and the consumption of magic power would increase exponentially. However, she had no other choice. If she allowed the Demon Emperor to continue freezing the entire Serpent Temple, no, even just the Coiled Fang throne, then her doomsday would come. Ice was solid. With such an abundant water source, the Demon King could freely use ice to restrict her movement space. For Vashti, who relied on agility and intelligence, this was another form of suppression that would drive her to death. Suddenly, Vashti raised her 6 arms high, all 6 palms facing upwards at the same time. In the thick and solid layer of ice that was like glass, the dazzling lightning that came from afar was refracted. After a full second, a series of continuous muffled thunder came faintly from the distance. Cracking sounds came from the huge layer of ice. Without a doubt, the layer of ice created by the Nephilim Emperor's surging mana was shattering like glass, and then collapsing from the outside. The sound was so loud that the people in Karazhan, who were watching the scene through the magic mirror, could not help but be speechless. At the scene, the sound of the layer of ice peeling off was almost deafening. In their field of vision, Incomparably dazzling bolts of lightning were like invisible giant warhammers, fiercely smashing onto the surface of the ice. Crash! The sound of glass shattering was quickly swallowed up by the surging lake water. Mixed with ice shards, the lake water rushed towards the throne platform with an unstoppable momentum. Lor's brows were tightly knitted together. He put his hands together, and the surrounding space suddenly burst with a bright brilliance. That was the expansion of the frost elemental domain again, with the last step below the platform as the boundary. Attempting to use a smaller range, but higher concentration of frost elemental domain, to separate the fighting platform and the serpent temple into different elemental worlds. It won't be that easy. Vashj endured the Sword Emperor's sword slash on her tail, sent the Sword Emperor flying, and fiercely pounced towards the Demon Emperor. She did not know that the two brothers had the ultimate skill, Gemini teleportation. With a flash, she would have to face the Sword Emperor's obstruction again. Unknowingly, she and the twin emperors had entered a stalemate. She knew very well that if this continued, she would be the one to lose. Vashj could not help but let out a scream. This howl traveled far and wide. At this moment, in the ruins of the Twin Tower stronghold, the allies who were fighting fiercely suddenly discovered that the enemy's offensive had suddenly become fiercer. Countless Naga seemed to have entered a berserk state, madly attacking. What's wrong with these guys all of a sudden? Brawl Bearskin, who had turned into a war bear, slapped a male Naga down with a bare paw on the wall of the stronghold. The guy's stomach was broken and his intestines were all over the ground, but he still propped himself up like crazy, continuing to climb up from the corpses of his compatriots and killing his way into the stronghold. That's right, outside the temporarily built stronghold, there was already a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Countless Murlocs' corpses were piled on the beach by the water, all the way to the edge of the nearly 10-meter-high wall. Even with this slope, the Naga's side still could not directly attack, because the entire mountain of corpses was surrounded by the flames created by the flamethrowers. Before the flammable liquid burned out, don't expect this volcano to be extinguished. Generally speaking, this was true. But above the regular combat power, there were still hero-level powerhouses and leader-level monsters. The powerful combat power that Vashj had sent away were actually all on the Twin Tower stronghold. Yesler, a huge strange fish with a face similar to that of a male Naga, was the hidden boss of the Serpent Shrine Cavern. It itself was not too strong, but its water arrow and fountain special skills had become the magic weapons to suppress the Alliance's flamethrowers. Under its powerful spray of water, the flames that obviously would not be extinguished by water were washed away by the powerful flow of water along with the oil. Although it could not leave the deep water area, with its strong support, the Serpent Shrine Cavern, as well as several area bosses under Vashj's command, were able to kill their way over and attack the stronghold's defensive line. The Slave Pen, the Steam Cellar, and the Dark Swamp, the small bosses of these three areas, under the leadership of several powerhouses of the Serpent Shrine Cavern, fought against the heroes of the Alliance and the Horde. Hold on, Sal roared. He had just sent Warlord Calathares flying with a hammer, and was almost tricked by the Water Master Surthbaya. Chapter 1426. 15 years after the Dark Portal, Illidan lost to Arthas in Northrend, and was forced to retreat to Draenor in the Outland. Illidan had been painstakingly managing his territory in the Outland. In 8 years, Vashj had firmly controlled Zangarmarsh. There was a saying that whoever controlled the water source would be invincible in the impasse. Vashj used the black technology from Draenei to create a large number of water pumps to extract water from the entire Outland. She also gathered a large number of elite water warriors. In the beginning, there were some tribal powerhouses who felt that gathering all the powerhouses of the Alliance and the tribes in the Outland to defend to the death was making a mountain out of a molehill. When all the powerhouses under Vashj came out, the Alliance army realized that they were lucky to be able to take advantage of the opponent's contempt and build a small fortress on the shore early. Apart from giant monsters like Yesler that could only stay in the deep water, there were also the three-headed snake Garzian from the Dark Swamp, the swamp giant Hoggerfin, the mechanic Stylig, and so on. The biggest characteristic of these guys was their huge bodies. If any one of them were to fight with the heroes of the Alliance army, As long as the heroes were given enough time, they would definitely be exhausted to death. That was the problem. They appeared together. Just like a tank charge, if a tank came alone, everyone had 100 ways to deal with it. The easiest way was to go around and launch a fatal attack at the blind spot of the opponent's line of sight. A tank charge was really unstoppable, and there was no way to escape. Without this fortress to rely on, the Alliance army was very likely to be defeated by the terrifying attack of a group of giant monster leaders. Then they would be chased all over the swamp and killed one by one like ducks being chased. However, with an extremely strong city wall, it was another matter. At first, the engineers didn't understand why they had to add a large number of triangular steel brackets behind the temporary city wall as auxiliary support. When the Naga ordered the Murlocs to fill the slope with corpses and pave the passage, everyone understood. Never underestimate the enemy's strength and madness. After the first layer of the city wall was breached, the almost completely sealed arrow tower that was specially not connected to the entrance of the city wall was still pouring spears and cannons out. The special design of the fortress could withstand the bombardment of cannons and heavy weapons very well. It could even allow the cannons in the second layer of the defense tower to directly bombard it without any hesitation. Anyway, the ones who died would definitely be the enemies. The empty space between the first and second layer of the fortress walls had turned into a horrifying slaughterhouse. Vash's subordinates wouldn't have thought that after the Alliance reached the city wall, they would still have the time to use excavators to perform Azureflight's ultimate skill. In such a short period of time, they dug 36 large holes with a depth of more than 20 meters around the inner city wall, waiting for the giant monsters on Vash's side to fall in. It was filled with abandoned steel bars that looked like barbs. Most of these were leftover bits and pieces from the construction of strongholds and other projects. Now they were perfectly used as traps. For example, the swamp giant Agalfin had just stepped over the Murlocs' corpses and rushed over the city wall when he fell into the pit. Between each pit was a 2-meter-wide path for the allied army to retreat. This width was enough for the Tauren, but for the swamp giant boss whose foot was more than 2 meters in diameter, it was worse than walking on a tightrope. Hoggerfin fell to the ground in a sorry state and was impaled by dozens of protruding steel bars. Roar! The giant, who was more than 5 stories tall, let out a mournful howl. Even though it was very painful, it wasn't a fatal injury for a swamp giant with strong vitality. At this moment, William leaped up high and raised his 2 increasingly famous artifact swords, Sharatol, Shadow Ripper, and Aramine, Shadow Plunderer. The 2 swords stabbed at Agalfin's throat at the same time, one red and one blue. 2 bright rays of light extended from the arc-shaped swords in his hands. In an instant, the swamp giant's throat was completely penetrated, and it went straight through to its brain. The swamp giant wasn't a low-intelligence creature like the slime monsters. With its brain destroyed, it couldn't have been more dead on the spot. Not every hero had William's attack power. Without 2 artifact longswords to pave the way, it was hard to say who would be the one getting killed instead. On the other side, Fandral Staghelm was very unlucky to encounter the 3-headed snake, Garzian. This super monster, whose lower body was like a lizard, swept its huge tail, and it smashed into Fandral like a battering ram. The violent impact sent him flying like a flying ball, and he crashed into the outer steel wall of the fortress. If he hadn't been able to transform back into his human form from his giant bear form, he would have been slapped into the wall so hard that he wouldn't even be able to dig him out. While Fandral was attracting Garzian's attention, Lilith's Windrunner struck a pose that looked like a golden rooster standing on one leg. She pulled the bowstring tightly with both hands, and used her long legs, which were second only to her sister's, to pull out a 2-meter-long bow that looked like an English longbow. Naturally, she wouldn't use ordinary arrows to pull out such a long bow. Those were the crossbow bolts that had almost been eliminated by time. Everyone realized that it was true that high-explosive bullets were used to attack small monsters. Armor-piercing bullets were fine against ordinary elite monsters, but the leaders that came out of the Kolifong Reservoir all had a layer of water elemental armor, and the power of explosive weapons was greatly reduced. Compared to the overwhelming firepower of the flying battleships above their heads, The more primitive attacks of sharp weapons were more effective against these thick-skinned monsters. This time, Lilith directly shot an arrow and nailed one of Garzian's 3 heads to the base of a half-collapsed arrow tower. Roar! The 3-headed snake leader wasn't afraid of injury, but it was afraid of this kind of attack that limited its movements. Without the 3 heads to attack from multiple angles at the same time, its attack success rate would be further reduced due to its slow movements. It let out a mournful howl, and a thick sour smell flowed out of its mouth as it opened and closed. Mortals would feel dizzy just by smelling it. Any kind of giant monster would be terrifying when it went crazy. When it rushed into the fortress earlier, because of its large size and slow crawl, it had already suffered several rounds of full-force bombardment from cannon fodder, and was already seriously injured. Although Garzian, as a boss, was not a big deal in the entire Outland, this monster's dying blow was still quite terrifying. The other 2 heads that weren't nailed faced the sky at the same time, and the terrifying acid spray swept an almost 180-degree arc in the air. This spray covered almost half the low altitude of the battlefield. Chapter 1427. There was no way to block this kind of strong acid attack. Several flying frigates that had lowered their altitude in order to protect the stronghold were hit with bad luck. One of them was directly hit by the acid. Under the attack of the acid, the magic shield, which was not very strong to begin with, only resisted for less than a second before it burst into a dazzling blue light and shattered. The strong acid that could easily dissolve steel hit the side of the ship. At first, the frigate that was more than 40 meters long could barely maintain its shape. A few seconds later, like ice cream placed on a high-temperature oven, more than 100 people on the ship, along with the hull, turned into green slime and disintegrated in the air. After falling to the ground, it even dissolved pieces of the ground, making a terrible sizzling sound. The other frigates that were hit weren't much better off. It was inevitable that the magic shield would explode. Most of them were completely destroyed by a few cabins. The only good thing was that the corrosiveness of Garzian's acid was limited, and it would stop after corroding a few meters. Garzian twisted his remaining 2 heads frantically, trying to bite all the enemies in his attack range. This was the last of its madness. In the sky, a wyvern flew over Garzian's head. The one riding the dragon was the former chief of the Dragonmaw clan, Zulud. Now it seemed he was also a Death Knight. Technically speaking, he was actually a forgotten warrior. Because his fighting style in life was to ride a dragon, he could only become a mediocre dragon knight after death. The Dragon Sleep Temple refused to recognize the wyvern subspecies as a dragon. Ready. Jump. Just as Zulud finished shouting, Orgrim, who had been sitting on the back of the dragon, immediately jumped down, performing a heavenly justice. It couldn't be helped. Grom Hellscream had already retired. Although the Horde had many heroes, it was an indisputable fact that they lacked a raider. Originally, Sal had the talent, but he was the chief. Only Orgrim would be able to do it. The snake-like long neck kept twisting. Garzian, whose head had been nailed to death, didn't notice the threat falling from the sky at all. The first to jump down was Orgrim. He did a forward somersault in the air and perfectly concentrated all the impact force into the hammerhead. This thorny branch warhammer was a good item from the Ankh-Kiraj Holy Temple. It had a standard hexagonal hammerhead, and it felt more like the hammer of destruction that he was used to. Although he had the frosted warhammer that Osrian had dropped, the quality of the Ankh-Kiraj shrine was already slightly higher than the Ankh-Kiraj ruins. Also, the frosted warhammer was a one-handed hammer, while this one was a two-handed one. Could the power compare? The second to jump down was Zulud. He was holding an Anubisath warhammer, which was more suitable for him since he often needed to ride a mount. The 2 Horde heroes landed one after the other. Because the height of the target's head was different, they hit the target perfectly at the same time. Because they were too synchronized, it sounded like a boom. Accompanied by a loud bang, 2 snake heads exploded in an instant. The hammer that fell from the sky directly blew up the remaining 2 heads of Garzian. This meant that another vanguard monster from the Nagas side had fallen. Without the interference of these impact-type monsters, Pharaoh, who was more suitable as a cannon like a Nastrian, was much more at ease. Without Jaina and Duque, He would be the undisputed #1 mage in the alliance. The largest magic amplification tower in the fortress naturally belonged to him. A series of incantations sounded, and the entire magic tower shone with a strange light. The elf-style arc-pattern magic arrays on it became brighter one by one. At the highest level, a magic array expanded beyond the area of the tower itself and spread into the void. Then, as this magic array expanded, 3 smaller magic arrays formed a triangle and expanded one by one beside this magic array. Then 12 huge fireballs appeared in the air one by one. These 12 fireballs formed a standard circle outside the magic tower, like the 12 o'clock positions on a clock. Then there was a continuous frenzied attack, as if it was the wrath of heaven. Every second, hundreds of fireballs the size of millstones split from the 12 huge fireballs and exploded toward the Naga troops who were attacking the fortress. Unlike the crude and biased bombardment of the flying fleet, the Sun King's fireballs were more accurate. Like a sniper rifle, they accurately smashed into the head of every Naga. The performance of the heroes on the Alliance's side was so outstanding that those who were not sober might really think that the Alliance had the upper hand. That was wrong. The ruins of the Twin Towers were located in the center of the swamp. It was not an exaggeration to say that this was the hinterland of Vasht's lair. The Alliance played airborne and defensive attacks. It would be great if they could invest 2,000 troops at most. However, Vasht could easily catch tens of thousands of murlocs here as cannon fodder, and over 10,000 Naga could drown this small fortress. What's more, this time, the Naga's flying snake army no longer held back. The overwhelming flying snakes could be said to be a comprehensive three-dimensional attack. The unique bang-bang sound of the 40mm octuple bang cannon had not stopped since the beginning of the battle. Even though they knew that the continuous firing would easily break, no one dared to stop. There were too many flying snakes. It was different from the single charge from west to east. Under the command of the leader, some of them climbed to a height of 500 meters outside the range of the anti-aircraft cannons, and then dived down. Some used the clouds as cover and moved in a snake shape to attack. Some used the huge mushrooms unique to the swamp as cover, and took a detour to attack. The problem was that the range of the bang-bang cannon in the early days of the Alliance was too short. It only had an effective range of 500 meters. Not only was it slightly shorter than the original 700 meters range, but it was also particularly harmful to the barrel. The original version was a 2-pound cannon, and had a special mechanical design that was especially suitable for long-term automatic firing. This counterfeit version was actually a large-caliber shotgun. It was not the same thing at all. Relying on human hands to shake often meant that the mechanical precision and automation were seriously insufficient. Some of the bang-bang cannons would explode on their own without the enemy attacking them after firing for a long time. Of course, the dwarves were also ruthless people. They knew that it was very likely that they would explode. The dwarf gunners sitting on the gun seats in the middle of the 4 barrels on the left and right wore 2 sets of armor, and continued to fire. A set of leather armor inside, and a set of plate armor outside. As for what would happen when the barrel exploded, it would depend on luck. Even though the anti-aircraft cannons were firing so desperately, many airships were still hit by the high-density attack of the flying snakes. At this moment, a destroyer had a gap in the tight air defense net because 2 anti-aircraft cannons had accidentally exploded. The flying snakes swarmed forward. Even in just 5 seconds, the other cannons had already filled the gap. But it was too late. Chapter 14:28. The unusually nimble flying snakes had already rushed to the deck. The flying snakes, who had already received the order, retracted their long wings and began to destroy the destroyer's propellers without a care. Unlike the thick deck, the propellers were still a fragile existence even with protective grills. A flying snake that had already been hit by multiple cannons chose to perish together with the enemy. Its entire body crashed into the propellers, and blood and flesh splattered everywhere. However, the snake's unique toughness also wrapped around the propellers, and the high-speed rotation of the propellers stopped. In the blink of an eye, the entire destroyer lost its balance and kept tumbling, falling from mid-air into the distant hills. Most of the soldiers who were flung out of the destroyer did not meet the happy end of falling to their deaths. Before they could fall to the ground, they had already been intercepted and killed by the flying snakes in midair. Under the sharp mouths of the snakes, only broken limbs and flesh could fall to the ground. On the other side, after a few seconds, a bright ball of fire rose in the direction where the spaceship had fallen. "Shrink the formation," Bulang nervously commanded on the Black Pearl. He had to constantly adjust the position of each battleship on the 3D map according to the situation of the battleships. The situation was still not optimistic. In the sky were countless flying snakes, and on the ground was a surging sea race army. The entire Twin Tower stronghold was like a small boat in a tsunami, about to capsize and sink at any time. Bulang cast his gaze to the east. At the far end of the horizon was the dark portal, which was also the only way for the expeditionary army to return home. "Duque, you have to make a decision." In Karazhan, Duque looked at the battle situation in the magic mirror and suddenly sighed. The twin emperors were indeed suppressing Vasky. In the elemental domain they had the advantage. What was worse was that this was not an overwhelming advantage. The demon emperor desperately urged the ice elements to freeze the surroundings, preventing the land battle from turning into an underwater battle. Vashj continued to wreak havoc, using lightning strikes or summoning large underlings to break the ice wall with brute force. In close combat, the Sword Emperor had no choice but to maintain his distance from Vashj. Once the distance was too close, the Sword Emperor would be beaten up by Vashj's high agility and speed. Alas! Following Duque's sigh, the battle on Serpentine Temple's throne platform came to an abrupt end, because a variable had appeared. Sigh. Vashj also sighed inwardly. This kind of opportunity to train with a suitable opponent was too rare. In this life, perhaps because someone had returned to the ancient war to stir up trouble, the trajectory of Vashj's life had changed subtly. First, before joining Illidan, he would follow Archimonde. Of course, in the eyes of the arrogant Arcarans, the Naga clan was just like a barge or a ferry. Archimonde, who had destroyed thousands of planets, simply looked down on Vashj. Not only did he work for free by following that Damak, he even reaped a lot of benefits. After all, he had lost a large number of his men when he landed in Azhara. Then, when Nazul raised the flag of rebellion against the Burning Legion, Vashj, who had already barely joined the Legion as a vassal, was directly sent by Kil'jaeden to follow Illidan. Then came another defeat. Illidan was outshot by Arthas in 20 shots. Vashj had no choice but to follow Illidan to the Outland dejectedly. But in this life, Duque gave Kael that's a hand. Instead of being corrupted, he became the savior of the Draenei. As a result, among Illidan's direct subordinates, Vashj could be considered to be the most powerful. Almost all the spoils of war in the siege would be given to her. Coincidentally, Vashj actually leveled up. Although she was only a demigod who strengthened her body and broke through her limits. After suffering for 10,000 years, she finally found a path of power, so Vashj naturally cherished it. Soon she could not see the path ahead. On the path of leveling up, Illidan would not help her at all. In the past few years, she had been one-sidedly beating the Draenei, and could not find an opponent of the same level. Even if she imitated him, she could not find an opponent. Illidan's path of dark energy was not something she could learn. Dark energy was refined by harvesting lives and souls. Everyone was harvesting. Illidan, the boss, ate the meat, and she, Vashj, could only drink the soup. The more powerful the power, the less it would be her turn. She could not improve herself by simply plundering, so what else could she do? On the path of power, she was completely lost. Now it was different. The Kiraj twin emperors were her best touchstone. She could vaguely see another path in the other party. This path had absolutely nothing to do with their previous master, Sithun. During the fight, she could only feel that she had to cooperate with something and form a resonance with it. Only by absorbing that thing could she make a stronger power take root in her body. It was a very mysterious feeling. Originally, Vashj wanted to experience more in the battle. Unfortunately, at this moment, the twin emperors suddenly retreated and stopped without warning. Vashj had to interrupt her journey of enlightenment and focus on dealing with the upcoming battle that could start again at any time. The twin emperors stood with their hands by their sides. Vashj looked up at them. knowing that this pair of brother emperors represented the will of the weave demigod Duke Marcus, and that demigod had obviously been watching everything that was happening here from somewhere. They stopped and did not speak, which meant the main character had appeared. Sure enough, after a moment, the illusory elemental radiance extended out from the weave, when the bright light condensed together and formed a human figure in midair. A calm voice descended on the high platform of the Kolifong throne. Vash suddenly had a sense of trance. She seemed to have heard the voice that lingered in the minds of every ancient Naga like a ghost. It was a terrifying voice that was absolutely unforgettable, a voice that ended the dream of the High Elves' power, and even dealt a heavy blow to the invincible god Sargeras in their hearts. Have we met before? It was a very comical and funny sentence. If it had been before someone transmigrated, this would have been a terrible pickup line. But Vash did not underestimate this sentence, or the person who said it. Looking at Mark Dooku's face, she put away the weapons in each of her hands into her storage space bag. Her 6 hands crossed at the same time, and she bowed deeply. No Naga who has experienced the ancient war will forget your face, your voice, and your power waves. The great demon Terminator, the destroyer of the void, the former high-level void lord of the infernal realm, Lord Mark Dooku. Suddenly being flattered, Duque was a little embarrassed, but he still asked directly, "Do you know a maid called Serenia Eubateria?" Chapter 1429. Duque had never imagined that he could see such a wonderful and complicated expression on the face of a female antagonist. At first, it might have been a pleasant surprise. He could clearly see Vash's pupils contract instantly, and the sound of her inhaling could be clearly heard from 10 meters away, but it was followed by trembling. Duque's system elf prompted that the surface temperature of Vash's skin was rising, and Duque saw that she was clenching her teeth. This could not be a good thing. If things continued like this, there would probably be no other ending than hacking Vash to death. In the next moment, Vash's entire body relaxed, and her excited eyes returned to calm in an extremely short time. Her gaze became unfocused, and filled with a sense of distance. Her unfocused pupils seemed to have traversed through time and space, seeing the past, seeing the glory of the High Elves 10,000 years ago. But in the end she laughed. Ha ha! Clear and seductive laughter echoed throughout the entire Kolifong throne, and even a small half of the Serpentine Temple. She actually, in a short 2 or 3 seconds, she acted out all sorts of emotions. Vash, Duque tilted his head and did not speak. His face showed an expression that said, "What are you laughing at?" Vash's 6 arms hung down, and her expression and posture were all sorts of unnatural. It was a feeling that made her feel at a loss. Do you know? In the past 10,000 years, I have imagined what it would be like to reunite with you countless times. My dear master, Mark Dooku no Duke Marcus. As soon as she said this, everyone was shocked. First, the twin emperors' expressions turned cold, and then became very strange. Did Vash just call Marcus master? Then what the hell were we fighting so hard for just now? Then it was in Karazhan. At this moment, all the queens, high priestesses, and female generals of the Azeroth continent were there. Like Alicia, Servanas, Kalia, and the like, they were purely onlookers. Aurelia, on the other hand, facepalmed. Duque, from calm to astonishment, and then to a high-pitched voice, Jaina was excited, just as Duque had expected. Vash was the enemy who killed Jimmy's brother. She had suddenly become Duque's subordinate, and it seemed that their relationship was not shallow. What the hell was this? The next second, Gianna found herself suddenly being hugged. That feeling that was as gentle as water. That power that soothed the soul. In the entire imperial harem, only one person had this kind of power. Tyrande. Calm down, Gianna, I know who she is. Believe me, Duque has never touched her. That was a very faint but inconceivable fate between master and servant. Tyrande spoke 4 to 5 words in a second, like a machine gun, which immediately calmed Jaina down. If Tyrande had explained slower, there might have been even more misunderstandings. Fortunately, Duque had sought out Tyrande before the crack appeared, just in case. Duque turned back and smiled bitterly at Jaina. 10,000 years is too long. I wasn't even sure of Tyrant's feelings at that time, let alone taking care of a mere servant in name. Is that so? Jaina's voice was almost a whisper. Don't worry, I will not forget your second brother's death. Even if she is really my servant, I will give you a satisfactory explanation. Duque walked over and hugged Jaina lightly. He slowly stroked her back, and could clearly feel that her body had calmed down. His divine telekinesis once again appeared on Mark Dooku's face. The situation was just as interesting. Wearing Mark Dooku's outer shell, Duque sighed. It really is you, Selagia. I really didn't know that you were Vashj. I should have thought that Queen Azhara had thousands of servants. What a coincidence. There are many unexpected things. I never thought that the god's emissary sent by the great Sargeras, who was worshipped by the entire High Elves, would be the greatest traitor in the history of the Burning Legion. I also never thought that the human hero who destroyed the Twisting Void Fortress and humiliated the army for 10,000 years, Mark Dooku, was actually the Alliance commander Duke Marcus from 10,000 years in the future using Nozdorma's power. Clap. Clap. Pa. Vashj applauded with her middle arm. Wonderful. This is too wonderful. Sure enough, compared to such a great undertaking that will shock the entire universe, the fate of a little maid like me, who was once half-hearted and turned to my new master and secretly stole information from my old master, is certainly not worth mentioning. It was clearly a compliment, but anyone could hear the bitterness in Vashj's voice. Vashj. Duque didn't know what to say. This was an extreme contradiction. Duque was a nostalgic person. Although he didn't have any psychological burden for giving up on Selagia at that time. After all, Selagia had chosen to inform Queen Azhara. He still couldn't bear to see her become like this 10,000 years later. Duque's words were suddenly interrupted by Vashj. I'm not Vashj. The servant with this title died the moment her master, Queen Azhara, gave her away as a gift. I'm Selagia. Selagia Ubatilia. An elven servant who was punished and exiled because she betrayed her new master. Then, something that no one could have imagined happened. Vashj raised her 6 arms at the same time, palms facing the sky, and a green brilliance began to linger around her body. Under everyone's surprised gaze, Vashj's body shape rapidly changed. The 2 pairs of arms above and below disappeared, and the snake hair that was dancing in the air was also gone. The long snake tail was shortening at a high speed. When the green brilliance disappeared, what appeared in everyone's eyes was a different kind of night elf. She had a head of red shoulder-length hair and fair skin, completely lacking the pale purple skin of the night elves. Under the chest protector that looked like white wings, there was an X-shaped dress formed by intersecting white ribbons, which just happened to lightly cover the sexy navel. The lower part of her body was similar to a Greek-style floor-length dress that Duque wore before he transmigrated. Even without the high slit on the side, the faintly discernible dress still made her long legs look exquisite and alluring. Vashj slowly walked in front of Mark Dooku, kneeled on the ground, and bowed deeply. Master, you said before, not every existence is qualified to stand by your side. Back then, you had the determination to endure 10,000 years of pain and torture to enter the Burning Legion as a spy. If I also have this courage and perseverance, when we meet again, you will accept me as your handmaiden. Chapter 1430. Vashj continued to speak tirelessly. 10,000 years have passed. Although I used the ultimate transformation, that you taught me to deceive my former compatriots, I have indeed suffered unimaginable hardships, and more or less atoned for my sin of betraying you. Now I, Vaslika Ubatilia, once again beg you, great master, to let me return and become your maid. These sincere words moved the women of Karazhan. 10,000 years of suffering. Everyone thought that the High Elves deserved it. They betrayed their compatriots, and finally fell into the deep sea because of the judgment of fate. In order to survive, they did not hesitate to sell their souls to Enzos. As a result, their beauty was lost forever, and they became dirty and ugly Naga, wandering in the dark and lightless deep sea, with the most disgusting underwater creatures. However, the ultimate transformation deceived Enzos, and also became the last hope and redemption in Vashj's heart. After 10,000 years, she actually recognized Duque like Tyrant. Was this considered as going through thousands of twists and turns, and finally achieving the right result? At the top of Karazhan, the women were silent. It was too cruel to use 10,000 years to test a relationship. It did not matter if it was the relationship between a man and a woman, or the relationship between a master and a servant. No one dared to say that after being separated from each other for more than 3.6 million days and nights, they could still maintain their original hearts. Not to mention staying in such a dark underwater world, filled with negative emotions such as resentment and madness. Only Jaina lowered her head slightly. No one knew what kind of complicated emotions she was feeling under her delicate face, which was constantly changing between a gloomy and a wavering expression. On the throne of the Serpent Shrine, Duque also sighed. Very impressive loyalty. I do not know what this 10,000 years of fate has brought you, nor can I feel the hardships you have experienced. Since it was a promise I made back then, and you have sincerely pledged yourself to me, I can't think of a reason to refuse. After saying that, Duque, who had the appearance of Mark Dooku, gently opened his arms, revealing a faint smile. Welcome, Vaslika. One sentence determined the whole matter. The twin emperors who stood next to him had a gloomy and unclear light in their yellow eyes. It would be a lie to say that they were not angry. If they could defeat Vashj more cleanly, even if Vashj returned to Duque's embrace, they would still be meritorious. Now that they were neither up nor down, and they still couldn't take down the two of them, the situation had changed. They had become Vashj's touchstone. It was too late to regret now. If they were given another chance, they would choose a more aggressive fighting style. Vashj, who had completely transformed into a night elf, straightened her back, a look of devotion and fanaticism beyond imagination on her face. 10,000 years ago, I had a chance for redemption. But I chose to curry favor with my former master, Queen Azhara. It was my stupidity that caused my 10,000 years of suffering. However, whenever I saw the hideous appearance of my compatriots, and compared it to my beautiful body after I cancelled the ultimate transformation spell, I always felt comforted. My lord, this is the beacon of hope that keeps me from falling into madness. Vashj knelt down again. This time, she used her trembling hands to gently hold both sides of Duque's right boot. The dignified master of Kolifong, who controlled the water source of millions of creatures in the Outland, and could even easily change the situation in the entire Outland, Naga Queen Vashj, in the most humble posture in front of Duque, told her loyal prayers. Praise you, my lord. Praise you, great Master Duke Marcus. After saying that, Vashj kissed Duque's shoe heavily. To be honest, Duque could not get used to this exaggerated salute no matter how many times he did it. Although the Nagas had dispersed and become clan-based, the customs that had been passed down from the High Elf period had not changed at all. Power, status, and class were all very solidified. Seeing Vashj's insistence, Duque also accepted this big salute. The master and servant status was set. Duque said, "The farce outside can end now. Every moment, there are more unnecessary sacrifices happening. Master, if I had stayed in Illidan's camp. Damn, are you addicted to playing infernal affairs like me?" He cursed in his heart. On the surface, Duque was the man who claimed to be the Radiant King. Duque's expression became serious. I am a demigod who spies on fate. I am the flag-bearer, who overthrew the tyranny of the Burning Legion. Wandering for 10,000 years is enough. A mere Illidan is not worth it for my maid to risk her life again. After the huckster said these words, the fanaticism on Vashj's face became even more intense. Thank you, my lord, for your understanding. However, this relationship from 10,000 years ago should be kept a little secret. Duque's expression was mysterious. Strictly speaking, the name Mark Dooku was not on the Burning Legion's must-kill list. This was because when he had publicly destroyed the Twisted Void Fortress, Duque had used the name Infernal Affairs. Mark Dooku was just a temporary alias Duque used in Azhara. Back then, there were 3 demon leaders in charge of Azhara, Magtheridon and the Eridar Gemini. The Eridar Gemini were already Duque's insiders. Magtheridon had just been killed by Varian, and it would take time for him to resurrect. It would not be a problem for a while. As long as Duque did not jump out and claim that he was the Infernal Affairs, the Burning Legion had no reason to immediately call their main force over. In fact, Duque did not believe that Kil'jaeden did not know that he was causing trouble in the Outland. According to Kil'jaeden's personality, after blowing up the Twisted Void back then, it was impossible that Kil'jaeden did not turn all the information and clues upside down. It was very likely that the fact that the Infernal Affairs was Mark Dooku had long been exposed. The key was that Kil'jaeden was pretending to be stupid. What was he pretending for? If Duque was not a transmigrator, he really did not know what Kil'jaeden would do next. What was shameless was that Duque was the kind of transmigrator who used history and future to the extreme. Since the commander of the Burning Legion was pretending to be stupid, Duque would also pretend to be stupid. When the time came, he would see who was the real idiot. Duque had calculated that as long as his main body did not run to the Outland, Kil'jaeden would definitely continue to pretend that he did not see him. In this case, what he had to do next was very natural. After a few seconds, two voices suddenly sounded on the originally extremely intense battlefield of the ruins of the Twin Towers. One was Vash's clear and mysterious ancient High Elven language. I, Queen Vash, hereby declare that I have lost the battle just now. It is the duty of the weak to obey the strong. I choose to pledge allegiance to the great demigod of Azeroth, Duke Marcus. My people, my servants, I now order you to put down your weapons and surrender to the Alliance. Otherwise, go to hell. Vash's declaration caused a trace of shock to flash in the eyes of all the Nagas. Chapter 1431. The other was the voice of Bulang Bronzebeard. He spoke in the common human language, informed the entire Alliance and Horde army. In the battle at the Serpent Shrine, the Alliance commander Duke Marcus's Karaji twin emperors have successfully defeated the Naga Queen Vash. Now Vash has surrendered on behalf of all Naga. Take note, do not attack enemies who have laid down their weapons, but for those who resist, kill without mercy. Compared to the Naga side, who were at a loss, the Horde's reaction was even more startled. Orgrim's expression was very interesting. At this moment, it was as if all the condiments and sauces in the kitchen had been smashed in his face. Almost at the moment the declaration was made, he realized that the gap between the Horde and the Alliance's combat power had once again been forcibly widened. As the old chief who had personally commanded the cruelest second battle of the Dark Portal, Orgrim knew best what a powerful navy could do. He still remembered those brave warriors who had grown up with him and fought on the front lines with him. They did not die on the bloody battlefield, but drowned helplessly in the water. His companions who were lucky enough to escape did not even have the chance to pull out the fangs of these warriors according to tradition, and bring them to their wives and children. The Alliance used the Horde's unfamiliar water battle to shatter the Horde's dream of dominating Azeroth. One had to know that that year, the Alliance still used worn-out sailboats that they did not even bother to look at today. They commanded a group of mediocre Naga and the weakest Murlocs. Could the Naga of the Angry Scales compare to these powerful Naga, who were on par with the Horde's elites on land? Sal patted Orgrim's shoulder and shook his head with a smile. The Alliance gained, we didn't lose either. Orgrim was stunned for a moment, then laughed heartily. I was thinking too much. The Draenor expedition this time seemed more like a feast to expand the army and recruit subordinates. The Alliance received the Draenei and a large group of elite Naga, greatly increasing their strength. The Horde was not bad either. Regardless of what those fell orcs would do after regaining their sanity, the biggest obstacle, Zangarmarsh, had been cleared. The Horde did not need to fight the undead and crowmen to the death in the Auchenton area. They could completely cross the mainland of Zangarmarsh and directly enter Nagrand to find their ancestors. Not only that, Orgrim whispered. There are many ogres and goblins in Blade's Edge. Once upon a time, Orgrim had an ogre personal guard. It was an assault force that was extremely terrifying even today. The ogres' strong bodies allowed them to wear the thickest armor effortlessly. They were living tanks in human form. In the Battle of the Scorching Canyon, this 100-man guard was killed and wounded. They were killed by the Alliance's most powerful artillery and the Paladins of the Silver Hand. When they died, they dragged 30 times their number of Alliance soldiers down with them. As long as the ogres were armed and placed in a place where cannons and other heavy weapons couldn't reach them, they would still be a terrifying existence on the battlefield. Not to mention Golan, the most powerful killing machine in our world since ancient times. Thinking of this, the two generations of great tribal chiefs felt a little excited. The alliance ate the meat while the tribe drank the soup. At the very least, the tribe didn't get nothing. Vashj led the entire army to surrender to the alliance, and this had a huge impact on the alliance. Whether it was on a tactical or strategic level, it had earth-shattering significance. The entire supply line of the alliance was opened. Because the Kolaifong Reservoir no longer crazily drew water from the Hellfire Peninsula, the barrenness and water shortage of the Hellfire Peninsula was greatly alleviated. In time, it could even fill the entire sunken path of glory with water, forming a canal. The transport capacity of river transport was many times greater than that of land transport, and it saved even more fuel. The tribe directly split into two groups, with Orgrim leading the main force into Blade's Edge. Although it was said that they were going to wipe out the remaining fell orcs, it was actually to recruit strong men. Sar led a division of 5,000 people, and ran to Nagran to acknowledge his ancestors. If there were no accidents, he would receive the shaman's inheritance, and become the original shaman in history, who was an elemental and enhancement shaman. While the tribe was busy recruiting strong men, the alliance couldn't be idle either. Without the suppression of the tribe's main force, the undead and crowmen in the Auchenton area rebelled. At the most exaggerated point, they even killed their way to the outskirts of Shatrath city. Left with no choice, William could only lead the army and wipe out the crowmen first. On the other hand, to allow the alliance's main force to wipe out the crowmen with more peace of mind, Duque, who was freed up, led the mechanized army into Moonshadow Valley. They built a city in the middle of Moonshadow Valley, less than 300 kilometers away from Illidan's lair, the Black Temple. Because the dwarves were the main force, and they had to use a large number of air forces, it was naturally called the Wildhammer Fortress. On the surface, Mark Dooku brought a reel with him, strolling around and looking around, as if he had nothing to do all day and was blindly giving orders. In reality, Duque had been secretly busy consolidating the forces under Vashj. Vashj had been the Kolaifong queen for so long, and she had accumulated a lot of power. Most of the aquatic monsters and leaders chose to obey. Only the swamp giants were not smart, or the dark energy they had been injected previously made them more violent. They were the most incisive rebels. In addition, there was also Leotheras the Blind. In this life, he wasn't as crazy as he was in history, but instead became Illidan's loyal follower. Originally, Duque wanted to control him, but in the end, this guy was stubbornly resisting, so he could only let him die. After consolidating Vashj's forces, and letting Vashj's loyal Deepwater Lord Carathilas take control of the army, Duque let Vashj pass through the Dark Portal, and come to Karazhan. "Dear Master, where are you taking me?" Vashj, who was completely in human form, followed Duque through one hall after another, and finally came to a vast balcony. This was where the Nightbane used to be, and Duque had also resisted the invasion of Nazul, who was still the great chieftain. Now this was just a window to the outside world of Karazhan. 10 steps away from Vashj, Duque stood still with his hands behind his back. The atmosphere in the air seemed to have quietened down, because of what was about to happen next. The surroundings were silent, and only the soft moonlight shone on Duque's body. "Suleika, do you know? Everyone has to be responsible for what they have done." Duque seemed to say these words without rhyme or reason. "Master, did Suleika do something wrong?" Vashj lowered her head, and there was a sense of grievance in her voice. "Well, you did do something wrong. Do you remember that you once led an army to attack Kul Tiras and killed Crown Prince Tandrit's family?" Duque's words suddenly made Vashj's face turn whiter than white paper, and there was not a trace of blood on her pale face. Chapter 1432. Even the quick-witted Vashj could not say anything in this situation. No matter what she said, it was a fact that joining the Burning Legion had destroyed the entire Kul Tiras. The most terrible thing was that Jaina Proudmoore was one of Duque's divine daughters. Duque seemed to be talking about something that had nothing to do with her. I value Jaina very much. She is one of the few mortals who has the opportunity to become a demigod. Once I become a true god, she will be my follower." At this moment, Vash's whole body was shaking like a sieve. Since Jaina had a grudge against her, then the best way to solve the grudge was, of course, to sacrifice her, the little maid. Was there a need to say it? At this moment, Vash really felt extremely bitter. She did not surrender on impulse. She had carefully studied Duque's actions. The Alliance and the Horde had fought for so many years and had a blood feud with each other, but in order to fight against the Scourge Army and the Burning Legion, they joined forces. The Horde took in the Forgotten, who were regarded as taboo by the Alliance. The Alliance maintained silence and calmly accepted this fact. The Karaji insect people swept through half of the Kalimdor continent. The Alliance took in the Karaji insect people, and the Horde did not even let out a fart. Who knew that when she took all the Nagas to join Duque would actually say that he wanted to settle the score? For a moment, Vash was really full of grief and indignation. What was the difference between this and being attacked by a dog? But she had no choice but to surrender at that time. Duque was already ready to take action himself. Even if Duque did not take action, her useless subordinates could not take down the Twin Tower Fortress. And if she continued to resist, she would definitely die at the hands of the Twin Emperors first. At this moment, Vash broke down. For a moment, countless negative thoughts filled Vash's mind. If she stubbornly resisted to the end, maybe she would not have to suffer such a humiliating defeat? Maybe her subordinates could succeed? Or maybe Illidan would be merciful and come to help her. Her mind was full of messy thoughts. More than one impulse emerged, urging her to make a last stand. But in the end, the only thing that came out of those squirming red lips was a humiliating plea. "Master Duke, do you really want your Celia to die?" Duque turned his head and looked at the sky, bathing his face in the moonlight. After a long time he let out a long sigh. Merit must be rewarded, mistakes must be investigated, and enmity must be avenged. This has always been my principle. As a leader, if the rewards and punishments were unclear, the people around him would naturally be divided. If you can't even lead the people around you, you can forget about leading the entire Alliance, or even the entire Azeroth. Vash didn't say anything. She knelt down and slowly stretched out her trembling hands to grab the corner of Duque's clothes. Duque did not dare to turn back to look at that beautiful face that was filled with despair and sorrow. He was afraid that his heart would soften. In the end, he did not turn back. Merit will be rewarded, and mistakes will be investigated. I've given you a chance. It's up to you to see if you can grasp it. With that, Duque suddenly pulled back his robe and disappeared in front of Vashj in a flash. "Master." Vashj hugged him fiercely, but what she hugged was only nothingness. Her whole body froze. After a few seconds, she came back to her senses and suddenly laughed wildly. "Ha ha, ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. My good master, your so-called chance is to let me die in the hands of your woman, and let her vent her anger? Ha 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 ha. Great. You are so great. You are indeed the chosen king of the humans. Ha 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 ha." It was an unbridled and desperate laughter. It was the self-hatred of being abandoned after giving everything. It was the wailing of being kicked into the endless abyss after thinking that she was saved. After laughing and crying for a long time, Vashj came back to her senses and found herself surrounded. To be precise, she was not surrounded. A large group of people stood outside a powerful protective magic array. In the array, there was only her and Jaina Proudmoore. This was clearly a magic version of a gladiator arena. "Are you here to kill me?" As soon as she asked, Vashj realized that her question was a bit redundant. She did not recognize any of the people outside the magic array. She was very familiar with the coat of arms on their chests, Kurtira's. Needless to say, Jaina wanted to kill her enemy in front of all the higher-ups of Kurtira's. Selfless revenge in the face of national calamity? What a joke. She did not do it before because it was not time yet. If she did not kill Vashj with her own hands, how could she appease the anger in her heart? Not to mention her, even all the generals and ministers under her would be indignant. Archimonde, who had tortured and killed the previous king, Dylan, was already hanging on Mount Hyjal, and the grass on his grave was 3 feet high. Even if the last blow was stabbed by Duque, Jaina, who had personally participated in the Archimonde Crusade, had received the initial recognition of the people of Kurtiras. As long as Jaina put an end to the death of the previous king and crown prince, it would be a perfect succession for the people of Kurtiras. Jaina held the staff in her hand, and a cold frost aura suddenly erupted from her body like a blizzard, dyeing the entire balcony snow-white in a few seconds. Vash. I, the current queen of Kurtiras, Jaina Proudmoore, am here to collect a blood debt from you for the death of my brother Thandred's family. What else could Vash say? Apart from extreme despair and indignation, she had nothing else to say. In the next moment, she had already activated the ultimate transformation spell, turning into the ugly appearance that was hated by the world, and even by herself, a naga with 6 arms and a snake tail. The middle hand on her right crooked her index finger at Jaina. This gesture only meant one thing. Come. Jaina let out a soft shout, activating all the magic circuits in her body. The magic that she had cultivated over the past few years poured out at this moment. This was definitely not a fair duel. It was more like a one-sided massacre. After leaving the water environment, the Naga's combat power would drop by at least 20% to 30%. As the mistress of Karazhan, Jaina had authority second only to Duque. The wizard tower was the domain of the wizards, and as the old demigod Mediva's inheritance, the wizard tower itself was already formidable enough. In addition, Karazhan was the core of the entire Azeroth weave. To start a battle in such a place, not to mention Vashj, who had reached the level of a demigod, even Thun would probably kneel if he came here alone. The intense battle with no suspense only lasted for 15 minutes. An ice greatsword condensed from the void and shot out like lightning, piercing through Vashj's chest and nailing her to the ground. She did not beg for mercy, nor did she beg for mercy. In the end, Vashj only looked up at the soft moonlight in the sky with her unfocused eyes. And all that was left was confusion. Are you satisfied? Chapter 1433. Jaina was silent. She knew that Vashj's words were not directed at her. It was to Duke that Vashj spoke of her sorrows. Jaina secretly sighed. Putting herself in his shoes, after suffering 10,000 years of suffering and torture, she thought that she could finally live a good life, even offering her soul and loyalty, but in the end, she was betrayed by her master. If it were her, she would also go crazy. But Jaina was not Vashj. She had her subjects and her stand. It was not about right or wrong, just the difference in their standpoints. Jaina found that she no longer hated Vashj. Outside the magic barrier, the generals and ministers raised their right fists and pressed them against their left chests. This was their salute to their queen for completing her great revenge. Before this moment, Jaina had been looking forward to this scene, but now she could not be happy at all. This kind of melancholy was comparable to the guilt of unintentionally killing a civilian girl. She wanted to raise the staff in her hand high and show off. To show off the glory of the queen. The growing sense of guilt in her heart made her arm feel as heavy as 1,000 pounds, and she could not lift it at all. The only thing that could be transmitted to her face was an incomparably formal smile. At this moment, Vashj's pupils that were beginning to slacken instantly shrank. The originally soft and pleasant female voice suddenly turned into a sharp and sinister male voice. Useless. In the next moment, the snake hair that was hanging down and even stiff and broken like a dead snake suddenly grew larger. The tiny snakes instantly turned into octopus tentacles as thick as a thigh and frantically curled towards Jaina. Without hesitation, Jaina directly used Blink and Flash 30 meters away, sticking closely to the edge of the magic formation. However, the dozens of octopus tentacles grew at the same time, like maggots in a tarsal bone. Almost at the same time, they reached Jaina's feet and easily broke through 2 of Jaina's magic shields. Jaina had been through so many battles and had rich combat experience. When her staff shot out an icicle, but found that it still could not stop the opponent, she cast Ice Barrier in time. But it was useless. It was a feeling of powerlessness as if she was going against the entire endless sea. That kind of divine power that was completely beyond her level easily pierced through the fridge barrier, made of super dense ice elements. The tentacles were just a centimeter away from piercing Jaina's body. In that instant, fear froze on the faces of Jaina and every single Kultiras. Even time seemed to have stopped. At this critical moment, an even more powerful and boundless divine power descended upon them. The moonlight was like a dream. The faint moonlight shrouded Jaina's body like a veil, easily separating the terrifying tentacles. The tentacles were twisting ferociously. Jaina, who was tensed up, could clearly see the palm-sized suckers full of sharp teeth extending and retracting in front of her, as if they wanted to grind her to ashes. However, such a short distance was the end of the world. The tentacles couldn't move an inch forward. A pleasant but dignified voice sounded in the sky. "Enzos, go back to your abyss." In the next second, all the tentacles that extended from Waski's head melted like popsicles under the scorching sun under the moonlight. Only then did Jaina realize that she had been hugged by Duque from behind. "Duque, this is..." Jaina was still in shock. Duque gently stroked Jaina's brilliant golden shoulder-length hair, a gentle smile on his face. From the moment Azhara fell into the deep sea, all of the high elves became the slaves of Enzos. How could the dignified ancient god Enzos not discover a mere, ultimate transformation spell? Then, Waski just thought that she didn't become a Naga. In fact, her heart and soul had long been secretly contaminated by Enzos. Nzoth planted his own power in her so that one day, he could take revenge on the person who ruined their plans during the ancient war. That is me. At this point, Duke was secretly glad that the system had not scanned Vashj and found a problem. If he had not specially found a place with direct moonlight and asked the moon goddess Alun to hold the fort, he would not have been able to do so. Perhaps he would have been defeated this time. If he had been ambushed by that kind of attack at close range, he would have been in trouble even in his own nest. Just the thought of being ravaged and devoured by a bunch of tentacles made Duque want to piss his pants. Jaina's breathing was a little hurried. She widened her bright eyes and suddenly thought of many things. Yes, Waski was so cruel because of Enzos using the murmurs of the ancient gods. Duque concluded without hesitation. All right. Whether it was true or not, Enzos had to take the blame for this. Forcing me to continue pretending, you can take the blame. Plan worked. Then, did I kill Waski by mistake? Jaina gathered her courage and asked. Duque said sincerely, "Kill by mistake? I don't think so. If you didn't kill her, Enzos' backup plan would never have appeared. Don't pursue this matter anymore. Promise me, from this moment onwards, forget your hatred forever. This is good for you, for me, and for the whole of Kultiras." "Yes, I will." Jaina nodded heavily, then turned around and faced the generals and ministers of Kultiras, raising the staff in her hand high. "I, Jaina Proudmoore, in the name of the Queen of Kultiras, declare that the vengeance of the late King Dayan Proudmoore and my brother Tandred Proudmoore's family has been avenged. From today onwards, the people of Kultiras must learn to forget their hatred and treat the Naga and Murlocs who have joined the alliance fairly and justly. Do you understand?" "Yes. As your majesty commands." All the generals and ministers knelt on one knee at the same time, lowering their noble heads to their queen. Duque. After sending her ministers away, Jaina suddenly felt a little uneasy. Duque had helped her so much. It was reasonable to say that she should have come to the magic circuit tonight for an in-depth exchange, but she knew that her subjects needed her, and she had to publish the magical image of killing Waski as soon as possible. Duque showed a gentle smile. "Go and win over your subjects today. Today, you are the greatest queen of Kultiras in history. You must be with your subjects. We will talk about our matters later." A large number of Kultiras left. The huge balcony suddenly became empty again. Duque walked to Waski's corpse. The former queen of Kolaifong was quiet after her death, and died with her eyes wide open. Duque smiled. "Fool, you have given me your sincerity and loyalty. How can I let you die so easily?" A mysterious aura suddenly began to form in the air, and some unknown factor behind the law realm was restless. Waski felt that her soul, which was about to disintegrate, seemed to have received some incredible and mysterious call. Whether they were willing or not, they could taste their own kind in their cheeks. The nauseating days, day after day, year after year. It was impossible to survive in the deep sea in human form. If they wanted to survive, they could only use the ultimate polymorph to transform into their compatriots and fight with limited nature magic. Because there was hope in her heart, Vashj, who originally didn't have outstanding aptitude, became even more outstanding. Exterminate the sea beasts. Enslaving the water elementals. Subduing the deep sea giant. Unknowingly, a large group of Nagas had gathered around her. There were men and women. Every one of her subordinates saw her as their hope and their faith. He suddenly smiled bitterly. My greatest hope is actually my master. This sentence of infinite emotion never flowed out of her mouth. Celia. Celia. The call of her former master would ring in her mind every night when she woke up, becoming her motivation to survive. This voice encouraged her, because her master saw through fate and foresaw all of this in advance. In her bewitched consciousness, this voice had become the majestic pulse of the river of fate. It led her through countless painful times, broke through the fate of certain death, and gave her the courage to lead more compatriots. Yes, this voice was still the embodiment of hope. Master, how can you do this to me? In a trance she cried. Ha! Am I not dead? Why can I still feel it? In a daze, she suddenly felt as if someone was touching her body. It was cold, but gentle, like a mother caressing her. A mysterious power poured into her body, making her blood flow in her body again, driving away the cold evil, bringing warmth and hope. The mysterious substance in her blood flowed faster and faster, to the point that she felt as if there were countless trains roaring in her body. At this moment, her heart was extremely quiet, as if her soul had detached from her body, floating in the air, quietly watching the strange scene in front of her. There was a strange power circulating in her translucent body. Ah, what is this? The illusion of memories overlapped with the things in her vision, as if for a moment, she had passed through the shackles of time. She saw Azhara City and the Twisted Nether being destroyed in an explosion 10,000 years ago. She saw Stormwind City and the Alliance prospering in the hands of one person. The replacement of the old and the new. The rise and fall of 10,000 years, all stemmed from the hands of one hero. He used the supreme mysterious power of the Bronze Dragon King, Nozdormu, to weave the fate of 10,000 years together. The ancient war, the return of the blaze. Countless creatures threw themselves into it, but only he used his power, strategy, and courage to write the epic of fate that belonged only to him into the real history. Therefore, the greatest legendary hero in the history of Azeroth was born. His name was Mark Dooku. No, that was his fake name. His real name was Duke Marcus, the true master who gave her hope and future. 10,000 years of hardship had become the background. Vashj struggled to raise her head and open her eyes. She vaguely saw N'Zoth jump out after her death, and also saw N'Zoth's plot thwarted once again. At the end of the scene, she finally saw the figure that haunted her dreams once again. When she saw Duke's gaze meet hers on the other side of the river of fate, she was so shocked that she could not control herself. She blurted out, "Master, so you never abandoned me?" Vashj saw the confident smile on her master's face, as if he had the world and fate in his hands. "Fool, you have given me your sincerity and loyalty. How can I let you die so easily?" Master Duke's voice was like a morning bell, driving away the darkness and waking her up from her daze. "I'm not dead?" Vashj struggled to sit up, and was stunned to see Duke walking towards her. "No. In order to atone for your sins, the previous you died. But now, I will grant you a new life." Chapter 1435. It was the man who was supposed to be her master, and he slowly walked over in the light. The azure cloak was like the sky, holding up his imposing figure. The white robe symbolized supreme holiness. Behind him, the six-colored elemental brilliance rotated continuously, but also blended into one. His black eyes were like the deep universe, making it impossible to see the end of it. Duke stepped forward, patted her on the shoulder, and only smiled at her. "Come on, your resurrection is not complete yet. Brand your soul to Azeroth and become a true demigod. What? A true demigod? Can I? Vash had yet to come back to her senses. Even if you can't, you have to, or you'll really die. Duque smiled and pointed at her chest. There, the ice sword that Jaina had summoned had melted, leaving a huge wound. If it were an ordinary creature, it would have long been dead. Vash was at a loss. At this moment, a gentle voice echoed around. Child, don't worry, leave it to me. You just have to follow my lead. Even after 10,000 years, Vash still clearly remembered who this voice belonged to, the great moon goddess Elun. Elun had once cared for all the night elves, and regarded every night elf as her child. However, some of the elves later became obsessed with the supreme power of arcane magic and abandoned Elun, who they once believed in. These were the High Elves. As a member of the High Elves, it was ironic that they had to rely on Elun's power to obtain salvation at the end. A look of shame immediately appeared on Vash's face. The temperature of the big hand on her shoulder seemed to rise by 2 degrees. She looked up again and saw Duque's gentle smile. You proved your loyalty to me with your death. Now is my reward for your loyalty. Don't doubt it, don't hesitate. I've already arranged everything. You just have to follow your heart. Vash nodded vigorously, and then looked at the moon in the sky. She seemed to see the encouragement of the goddess. Then she slowly closed her eyes, and used her soul to feel this world. Different. There was a huge difference. After Delano advanced to a demigod in the physical sense, it was only her body that had become stronger, and she could not get any response from the dead and collapsed world, let alone borrow power from it. Azeroth was different. This was a world full of vitality. Although the earth had been injured not long ago, it had healed itself after the abscess had been removed. He was completely different from the dead Delano. Moreover, there was an incomparably abundant space for advancement here. If there was a so-called pantheon in Azeroth, then this great hall would be empty at the moment. Already Vash felt the world respond to her. Welcome, child. In her haze, Vash heard the planet. Joining the pantheon of planet Azeroth would allow one to obtain the power of the planet and bear the fate of the planet at the same time. He was ruthlessly stabbed by a sword and even lost his life, but the reward was becoming a god. This time, not only did he not suffer a loss, but he had made a huge profit. So this is the bright path that Master arranged for me. Vash suddenly sighed with emotion. There was no more hesitation, no more confusion. Vash walked into the light with her broken body. Late at night, Jaina rolled into Duque's bedroom reeking of alcohol. She really rolled, rolling to the ground as soon as she opened the door. At the door, there was a displeased headmaid. Duque frowned. Vanessa? A Queen Proudmoore couldn't stand steadily. This nasty maid meant, I didn't push her. Duque rolled his eyes, but eventually went over to help Jaina up and put her on the bed. Obviously, Jaina had groomed herself, but she was so drunk that even her breath reeked of alcohol. Jaina's limbs were not nimble, but her mind seemed to be relatively clear. Duque, I'm sorry, I made it difficult for you this time. I know I'll eventually follow you to the divine path, but I still can't abandon Kurtiras. Duque smiled. It's okay, I know you're not a bad person, not a twisted and jealous woman. Jaina said apologetically. Is Vash really dead? Yes, but Azeroth needs more experts to become gods to help fight against the Burning Legion. So, she might become a demigod directly under the planet. Jaina stuck out her tongue. I knew a pervert like you wouldn't do something like that. Just because she came back to join you after 10,000 years, even a demigod was casually sealed away. And you still say you didn't touch her back then? Duque felt bitter. He raised his hands in surrender. I swear, I really didn't do anything to her. I was busy teaching Tyrant at the time. Really? Jaina propped herself up and stared at him. Jaina's eyes were fierce, and so were her magic mountains. Duque's interest was piqued. When he moved closer, something suddenly happened. Ugh! Jaina had drunk too much and vomited again. The shameless Duque flashed and rolled 10 meters away. He knocked on the door and shouted, Vanessa! Vanessa walked in neatly, and immediately smelled the sour smell of vomit in the air. She immediately spat out her venomous tongue. Humph! A drunk queen is no different from a female drunkard in a tavern. Like an eagle grabbing a chick, she grabbed Jaina and left. Duque raised his hand and cast an icy wind, finally dispersing the sour smell in the room. The problem was that even if Vanessa cleaned up the master bedroom later, the smell in the air would still need time to be dispelled. Magic didn't work well against smells. Duque scratched his head. It looked like he could only sleep in the guest room next door tonight. In theory, Duque did not need to sleep after becoming a demigod. Dooku was a mortal who had ascended to godhood, so sleeping was more of a habit, a rather luxurious enjoyment. After all, the weave was watched by Karthika and the demon king Veclor, as well as the system elves. Mark Dooku, who had been left in Draenor, was sleeping. The system elves were watching and would alert Duque if anything happened. Duque went to sleep peacefully. However, in the middle of the night, Duque suddenly felt that something was wrong. This feeling, woo-woo, amazing. Who is it? Who is playing with a bite of the tongue? Waking up from his sleep, Duque lifted the blanket. Duque immediately saw Vash's smiling face in human form. When did you come back? It's been a while. What are you doing? I'm doing what you loved to do 10,000 years ago. Don't lie to me. You bullied High Priestess Tyrande every day. I was watching from the side. Chapter 1436. Oh no, dark history. It was definitely a dark history. He had thought that there would be no repercussions if he went back to 10,000 years ago. Who knew that Tyrande would be willing to be lonely for him for 10,000 years, and that the little maid he had casually accepted and given a copy of Ultimate Transformation Spell was actually Vash. 10,000 years ago, it was a world that was barren of entertainment. He was used to all kinds of new variety shows, and when he had nothing to do, he would watch movies. He could even go to Bilibili to watch parody videos. Moke, who had gotten used to this kind of life, was not used to it when he first came to Azeroth. But at that time, he was playing Road to Survival, where he was the main character, and did not have the time to care. Finally, he did not have to suffer so much, and Duque did not stop exporting his own goods to Azeroth, such as mechanical pinball games, werewolves, and so on. But when he returned to ancient times, he was still deep in enemy territory, and did not have the time to do these. At that time, he was constantly monitored by the Eridar twins, and he was under a lot of pressure. Also, he could not stay for long, so how could he have the mood to export entertainment? Why was the ancient Celestial Empire so prosperous? They did not have the money to light a lamp, so they could only have sex. In Azeroth, it was a similar situation. At that time, in order to prove that he was loyal to the army, he did all kinds of evil, and used all kinds of martial arts on Tyrande. What 48 hands, whatever tortoiseshell divine spell, the High Priestess. If he did not take it easy, and if he revealed his true identity and said, I am actually a good person, he might have really done something like a fallen holy maiden. Alright, the main point was that when he was stirring up trouble, he did not hide it from Vash. At that time he thought, don't you want to spy on me? I'll let you spy on me. It would be fine if they never met again, but who knew if she would come into contact with me 10,000 years later? It was too long ago, and Duque himself had forgotten about it. Now that he thought about it, Vash was the one who completely knew about his dark history and bad habits. Tyrande was the High Priestess, and after being trained by him, as long as he did not embarrass her in public, she would definitely keep her mouth shut. But Vash did not have any scruples. The hypocrite Dumoke was shocked. Ah, my glorious image. My hero's halo. It's all over. Duque screamed in his heart. No, I must seal Vash's mouth. Just as the thought came to his mind, the system elf ridiculed him for the first time in a long time. Bitches are so unreasonable. Didn't you already use the Duque divine sword to seal her mouth? That's right. What am I thinking? The flirtatious Vash paused for a moment, her sweet voice like a cat scratching itself. My dear master, I missed you 10,000 years ago. This time, I didn't let go and completely offered my soul. This was indeed the right decision. I am your little maid, Celia. I was, am, and will always be. As long as you don't abandon me, I will use everything I have to serve you forever." At this point, Vasky paused, her face full of fanatical worship like a martyr. "Don't worry, I will definitely protect Master's secret. All of your fantasies can be used on me." "Wait a minute." Dumuk put on a stern face and said righteously, "No, actually you misjudged me. At that time, I shouldered the heavy responsibility of saving the world from being destroyed by the Burning Legion. So I indulged myself and pretended to be evil. I'm not what you think I am." "Is that so? The current master is very unconvincing." Vashj used the slender fingers of the night elves to tease him. "No, you're mistaken." Duque was resolute. "Really? Really?" Dumuk was unyielding. "All right, please receive my Naga tribe's ultimate technique, Water Spout." "Woo-woo. You can even withstand this? Very good. Now take my six-handed tornado." The rapidly spinning jade-like hands made Vashj in her night elf form look like she really had the 6 hands of the Nagas. This. Dumuk, there would always be a few days in every month when his moral integrity would drop greatly. Other than the times when he was particularly ungentlemanly, he was always a gentleman. It was just that the opponent just happened to catch his flaw, so there was nothing he could do. All the lower limits of moral integrity were man-made. When the man-made settings were destroyed by oneself, then only the will to fight was left. At this moment, in Duque's heart, there was only that incomparably famous incantation, the magically modified version. "I am the bones of the sword. One blood, and one blood. Undefeated in countless battles. Never defeated once, and never understood by others. Always standing at the peak of the harem, intoxicated in victory. Thus moral integrity has no meaning. My body is destined to be born for one blood." Sigh. Didn't they say that a Lun would guide Vashj to become a demigod on the side of justice in Azeroth? Why was this fellow so demonic? She had just handed over one blood. Yet she was so unrestrained? Could it be that the Nagas relied on waves to swim? Anyway, Duque almost couldn't suppress this seductress. On this side, Duque used the divine sword to teach that seductress Vashj a lesson, not knowing that something almost happened in the Serpent Shrine. What are we now? Human slaves? Perhaps we were defeated, but our main force is still here. Why don't we even have a decent position? What the hell is this? And I heard that because we once destroyed Kultiras, the Alliance Commander Marcus wants to settle accounts with us for Jaina Proudmoore. The news sent by the people below made the Deepwater Lord, Carathilas, secretly shocked. Now the Nagas had almost handed over everything. Even the Kolifong Reservoir was controlled by the Alliance. Most of the Nagas were sent to the Taroka Forest to repair the waterways and clear the wild monsters in the tributaries of the various rivers. If the Alliance wanted to burn the bridge after crossing the river, it would be very easy. The entire Naga tribe of more than 100,000 people, plus the servant army, waited uneasily for a full day. On the third morning after their queen left, Vashj finally returned. Seeing Vashj's new appearance, every leader was stunned. "Your Majesty, you." Carathilas was completely at a loss for words. What appeared in front of the Naga siren was a true night elf. If it wasn't for the extremely recognizable seductive face that had not changed, everyone would have thought that it was a different person. Fair skin, slightly slender hands and feet, red hair hanging to the waist. If it wasn't for the iconic long ears and eyebrows, they would even think that it was a human instead of a night elf. Not only her appearance, but even her aura had changed greatly. If she was a towering mountain before, now Vashj was the entire earth, vast and incomparably condensed. Vashj flicked her hair. "Let me tell you a piece of good news. I have become a demigod of planet Azeroth, and I am the goddess of the lake of Lordimir Lake." Chapter 1437. What? A true demigod of Azeroth? It took a few seconds for the Nagas to react. This was great news. What were the benefits of joining the Burning Legion? They seemed powerful, but in the end, they were killed like dogs by the natives in their eyes. The huge demon legion was wiped out, and the grave of Archimond, the commander of the legion, was 3 feet tall. He was forced to join Illidan, who was part of the legion, and in the end he was beaten black and blue by those bones in Draenor. In the end he ran to the Outland, a place where even birds wouldn't shit, to eat and wait for death. So what if he dominated the Outland? Who didn't know that the core of this planet had been broken, and the whole planet would perish at any time? On this floating continent that was getting drier and collapsing every day, was it really interesting to do the so-called water-pumping work? Countless Nagas wanted to return to the endless sea. Fighting with deep-sea behemoths every day at the bottom of the sea was more promising than now. Now, it seemed that they had lost to the allied forces of the Alliance and the Horde. They had lost face, but they had won. Look at the storm badge on Her Majesty Queen Vashti's left breastplate. In the past few days, they had already figured out that those who could have the storm badge were the direct descendants of the Alliance. Every Naga's eyes lit up. It turned out that Her Majesty had gone to seek status for us. In just a moment, all the Nagas present raised the longbows or tridents in their hands high. Long live Her Majesty Vashti. Her Majesty Vashti is wise and mighty. The cunning of the Nagas also originated from the court struggles of Azhara in ancient times. Anyway, flattery would not cost them anything. The guys who had just questioned Karatheras immediately changed their words and praised him incessantly. Vashti stood up, and with her elegant steps, her whole body was in the color of the lake, and she changed back into her Naga form. However, the sinister and evil snake hair was gone. Instead, it was replaced by red waist-length hair that not even Nagas or night elves had. Vashti's tallest right arm swung with force, her cold, clear, and dignified voice resounding. "All right, now as the Queen of Kolaifong, the leader of your clan, I declare that from today onwards, I will take on the role of a personal maid as the follower of the demigod of the Azeroth Weave, Duke Marcus. I will also change my name to Serenia Ubatilia, and our clan changed our name to Storm Naga." The Nagas did not feel that there was anything wrong with changing their names after voting for a new master. Anyway, after 10,000 years, the Nagas led by Queen Azhara had long since split up. The most loyal royalists were part of the group, while the rest were all looking for their own mothers. There were heretics who believed in the long-dead water elemental Lord Neptulin. There were also non-believers, as well as those who directly bypassed Azhara to lick Sea Thun's boots and become servants of the ancient god. Everyone was happy to see themselves submit to a more powerful master. As for Vashti running off to become a maid, if this was the human ideal, it would be a slap in the face, a self-degradation or something. The Nagas were different. After 10,000 years of cruel competition in the underwater world, they had long developed the habit of respecting the strong. Not to mention being a maid, even if their queen was a slave together with them. Wouldn't it still be the same? Moreover, when Vashti explained that she was baptized by Elun, and then placed under Duke's command, the Nagas looked at their queen even more highly. Back in Azeroth, it was a terrifying thing to become enemies with N'Zoth, but with Elun behind him it was another matter. Moreover, being sealed off to Lake Lordimir was also a smart move. This was equivalent to directly avoiding direct competition and confrontation with the king of the deep sea, N'Zoth. N'Zoth's strength was very strong in the water, but in the shallow waters of Lake Lordimir, his strength would definitely be greatly reduced. On the other hand, Duke had also solved a potential problem. One had to know that when they ambushed Deathwing Nesario in Lordaeron City, N'Zoth directly attacked from Lake Lordimir, and almost let Nesario escape. In the past, there was no other way without the conditions, but now that there was Vashti, Duke would never let such a ticking time bomb appear in his territory again. For Vashti, whose strength was only a demigod, a vast inland lake was definitely just right for cultivating her divine power. Not only could she nourish herself, but she could also expand the space. Vashti had personally explored that there was a waterway in the depths of Lake Lordimir that could lead to the endless sea. After the announcement, the Deepwater Lord Karathelas had one last question. "Your Majesty, why did you change your name to Serenia?" Vashti raised her eyebrows. Vashti was one of the culprits who destroyed Kurtira's island back then. The night before yesterday, the Kolaifong Queen Vashti, who had committed countless crimes, had already been killed by Jaina Proudmoore. So Vashti is already dead. The new goddess of the lake, the Storm Naga's chief, Serenia Ubatilia, is the new leader who is completely loyal to Master Duke Marcus. Do you understand what I'm saying? This time, Vash's subordinates all understood. Isn't it just deceiving humans? It's just that she changed the form without changing the dressing. Queen Vashj, on the other hand, didn't even change the dressing. Well, changing the head of a night elf was also considered a head-changing spell. Anyway, Nagas looked the same in the eyes of humans. Wouldn't it be easy to deceive humans? In fact, politics was just like that. Of course, since she was a demigod, Vashj would not let her subordinates have no benefits. The first thing that was given to the most loyal Naga was the incomplete, ultimate transformation. Even if it was a weakened version, it could only allow the Naga to maintain the form of a high elf for half an hour, which was enough to make the Naga, who had been miserable for tens of thousands of years, cry with joy. Next was a batch of epic equipment that had been eliminated from the molten core. The Naga did not have any blacksmiths, and their metallurgy skills were a mess. With this batch of weapons, it could be considered a complete change. In addition, there were also some magic inheritances. After stabilizing the Storm Naga clan, Vashj hurried back to Karazhan. Just as she returned to the top of the tower, she saw Jaina walking out. "Good day, Madame Proudmoore." Vashj, dressed in a white lace-made uniform, obediently moved to the side of the road and gently bent her knees in a ladylike greeting. "Madam?" This form of address made Jaina's heart sweet. She immediately came to her senses and stared at Vashj for a full 3 seconds before finally nodding her head. She only said a few harsh words. "I don't care how many masters you've relied on. If you dare to betray Duke, even if you're a god, I'll definitely kill you again." "Madam is too serious. Ever since Master Marcus gave me my name, I, Serenja Ubatilia, have never changed my loyalty." Vashj's words had a double meaning. Jaina stared at her again, and finally sighed softly. "Serve Duque well." "I will." Chapter 1438. Watching Jaina leave in her signature midriff-bearing mage robe, Vashj, who was bowing, secretly smiled. "Of course, I will take good care of Master." This time she had completely seen through it. Perhaps this was fate. This epic struggle around all the creatures of Azeroth and the Burning Legion did not belong to a single person, nor did it belong to a single sage. But for a tiny individual like her, if she wanted to struggle and survive, she had to find the most reliable support. Fate had given her a chance, and after missing it, she had endured 10,000 years of hardship. This time, she would not let go of the opportunity no matter what. And as a result, she had this feeling of breaking free from the cage and fate, and flying freely in the vast sea and sky. The true demigod of Azeroth. Was it not 10,000 times better than the Grass King who had collapsed the Outland? What was the use of following Illidan? Don't look at how he was a king in the Outland, and it seemed like he was very powerful, but in front of Duque, he was a complete failure. His beloved Tyrant was already in Duque's arms, and his head was filled with endless grasslands. He was addicted to dark energy, but he could not beat Arthas. On the other hand, Arthas was just a pitiful worm that had been beaten up by Duque time and time again. But Illidan could not even beat Arthas. Once the allies reached the Outland, the sturdy Hellfire Citadel did not last long. Hundreds of thousands of fell orcs were in chaos, and 200,000 to 300,000 were captured and killed. When they came to Zangarmarsh, they unreasonably filled up the swamp, and killed more than half of the Naga's precious flying snakes. Fortunately, she saw the opportunity to surrender quickly, and there was still the fate from 10,000 years ago. Otherwise, I always had a premonition that if I didn't rely on Master, I would have died in the Serpent Temple. Vashj muttered to herself. I never believed that there was a hero who could change fate in this world. But Master, you changed me. Vashj was a little self-deprecating. She did not expect such a yearning to be hidden in her heart. Thank you, my Master. Thank you for letting me recognize my own limits. There was a voice in her heart that immediately urged her. Hurry up and hold on to this life-saving straw. Gently pushing open the door, Vashj saw Vanessa, who had a bad expression on her face. She nodded politely, then pushed open the door of the inner room and walked in. Vashj, aren't you going to deal with the Naga tribe? Duque's voice gave Vashj an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Vash first gave a standard palace maid's bow, then replied obediently. Thank you, Master, for allowing me to spread the ultimate polymorph. Now the entire Storm Nagas are singing praises of Master's greatness. Storm Naga. That's the name given to us by our lineage of Naga in order to thank Master for saving us from our ugly appearance for 10,000 years. If the Master feels that it is not suitable, then we will change it immediately. But the joy of returning to our beauty is absolutely not the slightest bit false. Duque could not help but smile bitterly. The elves were particularly vain. Whether it was the night elves, the high elves, or the blood elves, they all boasted that they were the most beautiful creatures in the world. For other races, even if they were acknowledged in other areas, they would never concede in terms of beauty. In order to prove that she was not lying, Vashj even showed Duque the magical video of the Nagas being overjoyed after turning back into the high elves. This was really not an act. Do they know that they are still Nagas in their bones? Of course, even so, they are already very grateful. Just like me, I also doubted whether the high elf I turned into with the ultimate polymorph was my true body or an illusion. But in those unforgettable painful years, this was already the best comfort for my soul. This flattery was really smooth. Vash took a step forward. The Storm Naga tribe and I are extremely grateful for Master's gift, so we are willing to do anything for Master, even to die for Master. This was a bit exaggerated. Duque sounded strange. At this moment, Duque suddenly discovered that there was a layer of water vapor around Vash's body for some reason. This was like when Duque was not familiar enough with elemental energy, letting a few energy balls of arcane, flame, and frost surround him. On the one hand, it was a connection, and on the other hand, it was to raise his level. Vashj was a Naga, which was understandable. But who could tell him why Vash's white gauze dress became almost completely transparent when it came into contact with water vapor? A pair of long, straight, and well-rounded legs, coupled with the hazy water vapor. This was simply seductive. The gentleman Duque put on a straight face. It's working time now. Don't play this kind of trick again in the future. Vash bowed deeply, and a burst of dazzling white light blinded Duque's corium gold dog eyes. I don't know why, but I suddenly want. Duke mustered up the little bit of moral integrity he had and said sternly. I said, really? Really? Suddenly, Vash stuck out her nimble little tongue. It was really nimble. She was clearly a highborn elf now, but her seemingly slightly long tongue displayed special skills that theoretically only Nagas could do. First, it rolled back 360 degrees. Duque forced himself to be calm. Then, she returned to her original position and did a left flip, plus the tip of her tongue turning 360 degrees. Ugh. This was a bit impressive. She returned again, this time with a right flip and a half, plus the tip of her tongue turning 1080 degrees at lightning speed. The wall of Duque's moral integrity was instantly smashed to pieces under Vash's tongue siege hammer. Woo-woo, my moral integrity, it's gone forever. 10 minutes later, Vanessa knocked on the door and came in. She had a cold face. Reporting to Master, a cat that always wants to steal from the wizard tower has disappeared. Is that so? Duque sat behind the wide office desk with a serious face, leaning back on the comfortable chair. I heard that the cat ran here. No, this must be an illusion. Vanessa's ears twitched, and her face immediately turned sour. Dear Master Beast Duke, I have the obligation to remind you that the Magic Mirror Conference of the Alliance is about to begin. Please do it quickly. Good. Accurate. Ready. Soon. Soon. Immediately. Duque's eyebrows furrowed. Vanessa stomped her foot and walked away angrily. Duque was excited. He had become a great sage. In the sage's domain, Duque began to think about life. He had King gotten his most beloved tyrant, and he had maliciously taken his two capable subordinates, Kaizi and Vashj, under his command. Who knew if Illidan would really become a real villain after acting like one for too long? This problem seemed very serious. Chapter 1439. In the original history, Illidan was the ultimate example of infernal affairs. He had fallen into the deepest darkness of evil, and even his appearance was not human. A mouthful of shark teeth, a pair of sharp claws, and a pair of bat wings. Duque couldn't even imagine that appearance, let alone do it. What was rare was that after Illidan joined the Burning Legion, he maintained himself, and at the same time gained Sargera's trust. In the end, he made a huge comeback and staged a counterattack against President Sargeras. In this life, it wouldn't be so easy for Illidan to walk this path. With Duque's wonderful performance in the ancient war, it would be hundreds of times more difficult to win the trust of the Burning Legion's higher-ups. And the human heart was the most difficult to fathom. Think about it, in history Vashj, who caused the Kaiser and the Blood Elves to bleed, turned from a loyal subject to a traitor because of Duke's chess piece in the ancient war. Now, she is willing to lower herself to become his maid to serve him. Why couldn't Illidan really turn dark? This was a variable that had to be taken into account. No matter what, he had to deal with Illidan first and end the war in the Outland. But recently, there were a lot more demons in the Moon Shadow Valley. The giant robot Doomwalker and a large number of elite demons attacked. Even if they didn't form a battle formation, the pressure on the allies was still quite great. In the Wildhammer stronghold, the mechanized infantry was greatly depleted. It was almost filled with human lives and tanks to ensure the progress of the project. On the other side, in the Blade Peak Mountain, a large number of fell orcs mixed with a considerable number of ogres and goblins were gathering. It was unknown when they would attack. "My master, are you worried about the war in the Outland?" Vashj was clearly a night elf now, but she slipped out like a beautiful snake. She used a little magic to clean herself up, and she was a dignified and beautiful maid again. Duque closed his eyes. "You can attend the Alliance meeting later." "Yes." Vashj put her hands gently on her abdomen and stood behind Duque in a standard maid's posture. The scheduled time soon arrived, and the light in the room instantly dimmed. A projection of a huge circular table appeared in the originally empty room. Every meter or so, there was a projection of a leader. As soon as the battle started, almost everyone's eyes were on Vashj, who was standing beside Duke. She was killed by His Majesty Proudmoore, and after paying for her sins with her death, Goddess Elun purified her soul. She was killed by His Majesty Proudmoore, and after paying for her sins with her death, Goddess Elun purified her soul. After receiving permission from planet Azeroth's consciousness, she has successfully promoted of Azeroth's daughter of the demigod of Lake. Vashj stepped forward in a dignified and calm manner and bowed to everyone. "Your Majesty's leaders, greetings. The old Vashj is dead, and now my name is Salika Ubatilia. With this brand new identity, I will continue to be in charge of the Naga clan, which has been renamed Storm Naga, and serve Master Duke Marcus and the Alliance." After the master and servant finished speaking, everyone couldn't help but look at Jaina. Jaina nodded. "In fact, after I killed Vashj, I was ambushed by N'Zotha's power lurking in Vashj's body and almost lost my life. Therefore, the hatred between Kurtalas and Vashj was ultimately due to Enzos. Kul Tiras has no enmity with Queen Celia. We will treat Queen Celia and her Storm Naga equally." Alright, even the king had no objections, so the other kings wouldn't either. At this moment, Duque said, "The Storm Naga and its affiliated aquatic races will join the Alliance as an associate organization. If you wish to become a member of the Alliance in the future, it must be proposed by the leader of the Storm Naga, and approved by 2/3 of the representatives of the Alliance." Now that the Alliance was so big, they couldn't just casually accept new members. After all official members have the right to vote. Previously, when the Draenei who believed in the Holy Light joined, it was easier for everyone to accept. If the Nagas became a member as soon as they surrendered, many kingdoms would probably be secretly unhappy. Now that Duque had classified the Nagas and the Karaji insect people as an associate organization like the Silver Dawn, everyone felt much better. Agreed. After settling the big issue of principle, the leaders changed the topic back to the war in the Outland. First, William reported the situation in the Outland. It had to be said that taking charge of an area could really hone a person. After the Battle of Zul'Gurub, where he commanded a division, and the Battle of Hellfire Citadel as a commander, William had become more stable and capable. Thanks to Commander Duque's help, the surrender of the Storm Naga has allowed our supply line to be complete. The scales of victory in the Outland War are indeed tilting towards the Alliance. But I have to point out that our supply line is still too long. On the illusory three-dimensional map of the Outland, William pointed out a few locations. Due to Tsar's neutrality with Nagrand, as well as the friendly Orc clans, they have contacted and allowed them to join the tribe. Although the tribe has increased by nearly 300,000 people in the past week, it's because we have obtained the food reserves of those clans. Now the pressure on the Alliance in terms of food has been greatly reduced. I have to point out that this is only temporary. Once the tribe subdues more fell orcs, the pressure on the Alliance army's food supply will be incomparably huge. Our supply line has already reached its limit. Now, every train from the Dark Portal to the Honor Fortress is loaded with supplies and filled with orcs on the return journey. At this point, every leader frowned as they looked at the Alliance report handed over by their deputy. Tsar had officially requested for support from the Alliance, hoping that the Alliance could help move millions of orcs to the Kalimdor continent in Azeroth as safely as possible. In exchange, the tribe was willing to be the vanguard in any future battle against the Burning Legion, and they would send at least half of their regular army. To a certain extent, this was also risking their lives in exchange for a future. With the development of technology, the Alliance's army was also changing from cold weapons to firearms. The problem was that firearms were still passable against the small fries of the Burning Legion. Against the truly powerful demons, firearms were completely useless. Therefore, they were now walking on two legs. Those who did not have the talent to become professionals were thrown into playing with firearms. Those who had a bit of talent still relied on swords and knives. In many narrow places, firearms were not as reliable as swords and knives. If they attacked the Dark Temple, the compensation for the casualties would obviously be astronomical. It couldn't be better that the tribe was willing to send their soldiers as cannon fodder. But this price, isn't it just food? Just give it to the tribe. Don't forget, apart from the Burning Legion, we still have the Calamity Army. Queen Kalia was the first to make the decision. Chapter 1440. As soon as Kalia said that, all the leaders gasped. No one would forget Arthas. Even though Arthas only played a negative role in Duque's heroic return, the destruction he caused in Lordaeron had yet to be fully recovered. Lordaeron, Silvery Moon, Dalagen, Torrential Fortress. So many capitals had been destroyed or fallen one after another. Even today, 9 years later, not every capital city had been rebuilt. At the very least, the bitter Storm Guardians were still seeking funding from the Alliance to rebuild Torrential Fortress. The pain that the Scourge army had left on the Alliance was too deep. If the countries of the Alliance could barely tolerate the Forgotten Ones, it was because the Forgotten Ones promised not to take the initiative to kill and turn the dead into immortals. The Scourge army was absolutely intolerable, because the Lich King wanted to kill all the living beings in the world, and turn the whole planet into a world of death. Arthas was definitely the public enemy of all living beings. Now that the Alliance was forced to fight everywhere, they had no time to care about the Scourge army. Not having time to care about it didn't mean that they had forgotten it. With the permission of the Wyrmrest Shrine in Northrend's Dragonbone Wilderness, the Alliance, led by MI7 of Stormwind City, had sent core intelligence agents to actively explore Northrend in the northern continent over the years, using special magic tools filled with death aura as a cover. Many excellent spies had been sacrificed, and even those spies had become assassins of the Scourge army in the blink of an eye, causing trouble for MI7. But the sacrifice was worth it. Apart from basically exploring every place in Northrend except Icecrown Fortress, MI7 found the second of the three Bronzebeard brothers, Muradin Bronzebeard, under the seemingly vague but actually extremely clear guidance of a certain psychic surname Du. Sure enough, just like in history, he was temporarily brain disabled by Arthas, who had not yet completely fallen, and lost his memory. Then he was rescued by one of the natives of Northrend, the Ice Dwarf. Then, with a shake of his body, he beat up the Ice Giant and became the publicly elected boss of the Ice Dwarves. Now that this matter had alarmed Magni Bronzebeard, the Dwarf King abandoned his own country, and led a small fleet led by the Heavenbreaker to the whispering coast of Lordaeron. This was because the ship that would pick up Muradin would be there soon. The veins on Magni's fists were bulging, and his exact words were, "Amnesia? It doesn't matter. I will give an iron fist of love to that rascal who can even forget his own brother. I guarantee he'll remember everything." Originally, Magni wanted to fly directly to No Scent, but the problems with the flying battleship forced him to give up on that plan. The Iron Furnace Castle itself was in a world of ice and snow. The dwarves' products were only slightly less effective in the heat, but they also had enough anti-freezing equipment. The problem was that the device was suitable for -10 degrees Celsius, but it would fail at -40 degrees Celsius. This was not a problem that could be solved with antifreeze oil. If the Alliance wanted to attack Nascent's Ice Crown Fort, all their heavy equipment couldn't be used. In other words, forcefully attacking meant sacrificing human lives. It would be great if the tribe was willing to be the vanguard. It was true that the Alliance was under a lot of pressure in terms of food and economy. As long as the Horde did not start a war with the Alliance and continued to be hostile to the Cataclysm, it would be a good bet. There were 3 rich countries with the most surplus food in the Alliance. Lordaeron, who purified the eastern plaguelands and revived the Tirisful Glades. New Alterac, who opened up the Hillsbrad Plains and took over thousands of miles of fertile land during the Second Battle of the Dark Portal. Stormwind, who owned the Western Plains, formerly the Western Wilderness, Elven Forest, and the 3 major grain-producing areas in the north of Stranglethorn Vale. Due to the principle of proximity, the food transported to the outer regions was basically provided by Stormwind. Stormwind was already having a hard time. However, Kalia took the lead to settle the food for the Horde immigrants. Due to the principle of advancing and retreating together, Elugia made the decision on the spot. With the support of the 3 major grain-producing countries, the Alliance's decision was also passed. Next question. William heaved a sigh of relief. Due to the large number of Orc immigrants crossing the border, there is still enough food in the outer regions for a short period of time. My logistics minister told me that the food shortage in a month's time is estimated to be no less than 300,000 tons. This question made the leaders of the Alliance frown. The Dark Portal couldn't be opened for a long time. This was because teleportation meant a huge loss of energy. Where did the energy come from? After the Cursed Land became a barren wasteland, the energy to open the teleportation portal basically came from the outer regions. The Dark Portal absorbed the surrounding energy to maintain itself. This formed a paradox. If they wanted to increase their supplies, they needed more energy. Absorbing more energy might cause Draenor's collapse to accelerate. If they were not careful, they would lose everything, and everyone in the outer regions would die together. Moreover, before the Orcs were completely evacuated, the Horde would not allow the Alliance to destroy Draenor. Otherwise, they would not hesitate to start a war. At this moment Vashj, who was beside Duque, raised her hand gently and requested to speak. Seleka, go ahead. Duque called out Vashj's name. The Storm Nagas can supply a portion of the food from the outer regions. Because there is no pollution in the Serpent Lake, the polluted water has already been drained to the swamp further west through the pipes. If we were to release the harvesting, Vashj glanced at Tyrant and changed her words. If we can ensure a sustainable supply, the Storm Nagas can provide 200,000 tons of unpolluted fish to the surrounding 4 regions every month. What about further? William asked. The fish will rot. Duque pondered for a moment. Under the premise that we don't fish out all the fry, what is the maximum output of Zangermarsh per month? 500,000 tons. Vashj's answer made the big shots of the Alliance gasp in surprise. Duque decided. 400,000 tons per month. Half of it will be supplied in the form of fresh fish, and the other half will be supplied by the Alliance to be salted into salted fish for the Horde's immigrants to eat. No one would have thought that the Storm Nagas could actually solve the biggest food problem by relying on them. From the looks of it now, the Naga tribe had turned from the biggest obstacle to the biggest help. The Alliance had really profited. Wow, Duque, I really envy you. Let's see when the Wildhammer dwarves will also take in a vassal race to play with? Kudrin Wildhammer laughed. You can take in the harpies. Duque's words killed Kudrin. Kudrin's face turned green as he thought of the harpies who would gang up on him because of the language barrier. Alright, let's stop joking. William, do you have any more questions? One last question. It is impossible for our forces to fight at full strength on both fronts. If possible, I hope to cooperate with the Horde to solve the Blade Peak and Nether Storm regions first. William pointed to the northern part of the outer regions map. Chapter 1441. Firstly, there are fell orcs attacking from behind. Even if the Storm Nagas help us block the attack from the Blade Peak Mountain, we still can't rescue the Draenei and Kale, that's Blood Elves who are trapped in the Storm Fortress. Secondly, we know too little about the Moon Shadow Valley. If we launch an all-out attack, the Burning Legion might ambush us from behind. Also, the Moon Shadow Valley is too vast. We need 1 or 2 large fortresses as a base. Actually, William was more worried about something else. The Alliance now had flying battleships and could play with heavenly justice. But the Burning Legion had space battleships and could also play with demons from the sky. The troops that tried to attack the Moon Shadow Valley were destroyed by the hellfire that fell from the sky several times. Draenor did not have a planetary protection array, and this so-called atmosphere was not fortified. The current technology was not reliable at all in terms of air defense. Only the magic tower was more effective. This meant that the attack on the Darkness Shrine would not be done in one go. It had to be pushed forward slowly. In a situation where there were worries and there was no forward base, it would be easy to get into trouble if they rashly sent in all their troops. However, it was not easy to repair the forward base while resisting the attack of the demons in the Moon Shadow Valley. Hence, William pushed the responsibility to him. They could either give him more troops or help him resist the enemies in the Moon Shadow Valley. It would be best if the forward base could be repaired before the army returned. No leader raised any opinions on the spot. Everyone looked at Duque. This time Duque was a little ungrateful. He said that he would let William be the commander of the expeditionary army. In the end, when they finally conquered the Hellfire Fortress, Duque got his substitute to do the work secretly and took over Vashj. Of course, William also knew that it would be difficult for him to monopolize power in the Outland. Firstly, he did not have the status and qualifications to control Thrall. He had no choice but to kick the ball back to Duque. Duque thought for a moment and made a decision. My substitute, Mark Dooku, will be in charge of building the Wild Hammer Fortress as a forward base. During this period, Kudrin, Bulang, Lilith, Vashj and their subordinates will be under Mark Dooku. Yes, Sir Willan. Please send an elite troop to assist us. Understood. Understood. Yes, Master. No problem. All the leaders agreed. Duque turned to face William's projection. I'll give you 3 months at most. In at most 3 months, I hope to see your main force return with the Draenei and Kale, that's division. Leave it to me. William patted his chest. The next day, a flock of griffins flapped their wings and passed through the dark, psychedelic night sky. Behind the Griffin Knights was a rather scattered fleet of airships. The entire fleet departed from Fort Glory and took a detour around the thorny rocky grounds. They didn't enter Fort Windrunner, but directly flew north and entered Moon Shadow Valley. Along the way, there were many accidents. For some unknown reason, both the man and the griffin exploded in midair. He had also personally witnessed the scene of a plane full of people and goods crashing in the sky. The laws of the Draenor world seemed to be crumbling. There was no possibility of rebuilding this special world that lacked a core, and only had a few continents floating in the void. In any case, Delano would obviously die in the long river of history faster than in the original history. As the fleet swept across the dark land west of Moon Shadow Valley, the power of the dark energy could be seen eroding the entire Moon Shadow Valley. It could be seen without binoculars, as the dark energy was rampant on this continent. The highly concentrated energy had attracted the demons in the void. Almost all the demon species of the Burning Legion could be found here. Imps, Cerberus, demonic guardians, dread guardians, Shavala, Doomguard. There were even groups of demons gathering and swarming towards the center of Moon Shadow Valley, where the mana smelting pool and other areas with high energy response. Looking down from the sky, It looked like a wave of darkness. Hoof Imriel, who was standing beside Mark Dooku, shuddered. Seeing the place where she used to live turned into such a ghastly state, she thought of the temple of Karabaer that she had stayed in for a long time becoming a temple of darkness. She shuddered. Bulang complained. Hey, we're really going to build a city here. Are you mentally prepared to lose 100,000 dwarven boys? Thinking of relying on less than 10,000 dwarves to build a city in a place surrounded by demons, Bulang's scalp went numb. After all, when the construction of the Wildhammer Fortress failed, more than 3,000 people died, and the 5,000 who came back were all injured. 3,000 people did not sound like a lot, but many of them were elite dwarven engineers and craftsmen. Bulang's heart ached. Dwarves had long lifespans and a long growth period. No matter how they encouraged reproduction, it was not easy to make up for the losses in war. At this time, Duque smiled. I'll be in charge of this, don't worry. When have I ever let you down? At this moment, Vasht's magical message came. Master, everything is ready. Let's begin. After Duque gave the order, there was silence for a few minutes. If one was not familiar with Duque, they might think that Duque was pretending to be a fool. At this moment, from the direction they flew from, a silver line suddenly appeared, stretching from north to south for who knows how many kilometers. Rumble. A shocking and terrifying sound came from far and near. This is. His hooves gripped the side of the ship, and even his tail that always swung around stopped moving. F***ck. So generous? Bulang's jaw dropped, and even the wine bottle in his hand fell to the ground. Duque's smile was full of absolute confidence. I've always been generous. It was a waterline that connected heaven and earth. Innumerable huge waves of several tens of meters high rushed towards the Moon Shadow Valley from west to east. The surging waves showed what it meant to be a raging wave. Whether it was the black land, the wooden houses built on the hills by the old beastmen, or the ferocious demons that were wreaking havoc on the land, they were all easily swallowed by this terrifying wave. The muddy tide easily filled up every low-lying area of Moon Shadow Valley within his field of vision. Imriel covered her mouth with her hand. She had witnessed Duque's miraculous actions more than once, filling up the lake like a whip to stop the flow, a big move that flooded half of Moon Shadow Valley. This imagination, this ability to execute. Is Mark Dooku really an ordinary Radiant Moon Great Wizard? Imriel's curiosity was about to explode, almost causing her to suffer internal injuries. Duque casually pointed, and that finger seemed to be pointing at everything. Actually, the bottom of Zanger Marsh is very big, and the lakes in the swamp are very deep. Because Vasht used a water pump, almost all of Draenor's water was concentrated in the Serpent Lake. What I'm doing now is just letting Vasht return the water that she took back to the east of Terakar Forest. Chapter 1442. Bulang's eyes flashed. And then you get someone to blow up the higher entrance of the Moon Shadow Valley, and let the massive amount of water pour into the valley? Duque smiled. Everything was calculated by the system. After scanning the topographic map of the entire Moon Shadow Valley, the system elf prompted Duque if he wanted to do Guan Er Good drown the 7 armies. Duque decisively clicked yes. When he came to the Moon Shadow Valley as a player before he transmigrated, he did not think that it was that bad. At most, it was the depressing sky, the slightly nauseating atmosphere, and the color rendering. Only when he came to the Moon Shadow Valley did he realize that it was not a place for people to stay. On the black land eroded by the dark energy, there was a dry and stinky wind everywhere, and the air was filled with a nauseating smell. There was no clean water to be found. After flying on the Griffin for a whole day, all he saw was a neon green dark energy lake. That bright green color easily made people think of something like nuclear cola, radiation sickness, and the like. Duque strongly suspected that staying in this place for 3 months, any normal person would become demonic, and become neither human nor ghost. The dwarves who tried to build the Wildhammer Fortress had to dig deep wells to extract the muddy water, filter it, and then pour large bottles of Shotrath holy water to neutralize it before they dared to drink it. Building a castle, even if it was mechanized, was heavy physical labor. Water was essential, or else people would die. Since he had to clean up the scattered demons, Duque might as well flood the entire western half of the Moonshadow Valley. Looking down from the airship, this sea-like scenery could not be said to be boundless, but it had an even more shocking effect. The airship fleet was less than 20 kilometers into the Moonshadow Valley, and geographically, they had just come in through the narrowest funnel-shaped entrance on the ground. If the waterline came from the west, they could barely see the end of the waterline, but as the Moonshadow Valley's basin-like structure moved from west to east, the area of flat land became larger and larger. After the waves pushed over, it formed a long arc, so long that the end could not be seen. Only at the north and south sides of it, the end could barely be seen. Because the sky above the Moonshadow Valley was shrouded in a large amount of demonic fog, the lighting was quite poor. Even with binoculars, one could only see the undulating shadows. Even though he knew that it was the mountain range that surrounded the entire Moonshadow Valley, he still felt as if it was the border between the sea and the void, as if it was merely the dark oil paint of a painter's brush. Under the outline of the long mountain ranges in the north and south, there was a lake that was muddy and a bit green. It couldn't be said to be boundless, but the feeling of washing away all the rubbish was quite satisfying. The flying fleet continued to advance. After more than an hour, they arrived at the location of the abandoned Wildhammer stronghold. It was a typical hill. Although it was not too high, it was still more than 100 meters above the valley floor. The corpses that they didn't manage to retrieve in time had already been devoured by wild beasts, until only a few bones were left. The remnants of the abandoned city walls still had the incomparably tyrannical claw marks of the evil demons. But now everything was different. Hellfire, aren't you very powerful? Burn everything, burn, burn. Do you have the ability to evaporate this sea-like lake? Helldog, aren't you very fast? Do you have the ability to accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in water for me to see? Although the old site of the Wildhammer stronghold in the southern mountain range now looked like a lone island in the middle of the ocean, the Burning Legion, who were only good at land and air battles, had no way of passing through this vast lake. Coming down from the flying battleship, Mark Dooku and his men stood at the edge of this peninsula, their expressions extremely relaxed. Bulang called out to his men, "Little bastards, hurry up and get to work. I want to see a beginner-level beach blocking position with anti-air firepower within half an hour." Kudrin Wildhammer got down from his Griffin King Scarlet. They had been flying for 3 hours since they left Fort Windrunner. Even the Griffin King was a little tired, let alone the other griffins. "Yo, Duque, can't you get your Storm Naga to control this area of water? Then we only need to guard against the enemies coming from the sky." Duque shook his head and pointed to the fluorescent green surface of the water. "You swim in it every day. If there's no holy light to help you expel the evil energy in your body, let's see if you'll turn into a demon." If not for the large amount of evil energy in the water, Duque would really have mobilized the Naga to defend. After all, the demons of the Burning Legion were almost all-terrain creatures. Many demons could breathe better, and even if they could not, they could make do. Duque had seen the records. In the past 25,000 years, the Burning Legion could even conquer and destroy the gaseous creatures of the gaseous planets, let alone a small water attack. This was just an obstacle, not an insurmountable moat. Of course, the small-scale Naga troops were still prepared. There was a 1,000-strong elite Naga team on the transport ship. If the pressure on the front line was too great, Duque would invest in this team of Nagas. At most, he would use the diluted holy water of Shatrath City to bathe the Nagas. However, for 3 days in a row, there was no danger. There were indeed demons emerging from the water like the Loch Ness Monster, but there were not many who actually attacked the fortress in the building. More of them were the instincts of the low-level demons driving the scattered demons to break into the fortress defense circle. They came at irregular intervals. Sometimes it was just 1 or 2 hellhounds coming to deliver food, and sometimes it was a whole team of demon guards. This was a pain in the ass for the defenders. They could only deploy as many troops as possible, divided into 4 teams, and rotated every 2 hours. Each time, there would be no less than 3,000 troops stationed on the shore. After 3 days, even if they ran to stand for 2 hours every 6 hours, The morale of the troops was clearly low. After all, no one knew how many demons would follow after the first one emerged from the water. Sending out Naga scouts was not a good move. There was a lot of green evil energy in the water. And the water was murky. The range of detection was quite limited, and there were Nagas who were killed and could not come back. Well, this is forcing me to use my ultimate move. Duque sighed. On the morning of the fourth day, on the makeshift dock, everyone saw a strange new machine that extended part of its parts into the water. Duque stood in front of the machine and proudly announced to a group of dwarves, gnome craftsmen and scientists, "Hello everyone, welcome to the latest masterpiece of Marcus Future Technology Company, Limited, the underwater sonar system." Sonar is an electronic device that uses the transmission characteristics of sound waves underwater, and through electroacoustic conversion and information processing, it completes underwater detection and communication tasks. Our new passive product belongs to the category of acoustic positioning. By monitoring the noise in the water, we can roughly determine how many enemies are coming and what their size is. Chapter 1443. Passive Sonar. Passive sonar technology refers to the sonar passively receiving the radiation noise produced by underwater targets such as ships and signals emitted by underwater acoustic equipment to determine the position and distance of the target. It evolved from a simple hydrophone. It listened to the noise emitted by the target and determined the position and some characteristics of the target. It was especially suitable for situations where one could not make a sound and had to detect the movements of the enemy ships. Duque definitely wanted to make an active sonar, but the problem was that even if he kept instilling advanced technology into the scientists of Steel Stove Fort and Storm City, with the industrial level of this era, it was impossible to make it. For example, the sealing technology of this era was not up to standard at all. The ship's steel plates made of willow nails and welded together were still passable on the water, but when the pressure was higher underwater, it would be like a fountain everywhere. That experiment almost cost 2 senior scientists and a bunch of engineers. They could only settle for the next best thing, which was to make a coastal sonar. Of course, in order to locate the target more clearly, he had people set up a sound transmission device 500 meters away from the water's edge, and not too deep. Duque controlled Mark Dooku. With a pretentious smile on his face, he twisted the button of the sonar device. From the loudspeaker, everyone could hear a very rhythmic beep, beep, beep sound. Duque continued to explain. "This is the sound we actively emit. We only need to listen for any clutter in the echo, and we can roughly determine the enemy's position and number." Before Duque could finish, a loud sound suddenly came from the loudspeaker. Thump, 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 thump. Duque was stunned when he heard this. A bunch of extremely imaginative dwarves suddenly began to make all sorts of comments. "This sound, it sounds so real. It feels like there's something beating in this thing." Bulang was the first to speak. "Yeah, could it be the footsteps of demons walking underwater?" Comrade Kudrin's imagination ran wild. "Yeah, most demons can't swim. They do walk underwater. But this sound is a little too sharp and clear. Shouldn't the sound underwater be a little more vague?" Bulang retorted. Only Duque's face turned green. As a veteran who has watched classic submarine war movies such as U-571, he certainly knew that this had nothing to do with sonar. With just a scan, the system found out what was inside the heavily guarded sonar system that he treated like a treasure. It was actually a bunch of little iguanas. Many of the Alliance's soldiers on the Draenor continent must have seen many of these annoying fairies. Although these palm-sized iguanas didn't have powerful attacks and didn't have strong bodies, and they looked easy to bully, they always moved in groups. It reminded you of a nostalgic species on the Azeroth continent. That's right, Murlocs. Woo 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 woo. However, these fairies were not as annoying as the Murlocs. The first time they saw the iguana, they thought it was a little scary. They had the heads of frogs, sharp teeth, small eyes, rough claws with 4 fingers, and a wretched figure. However, after seeing them many times on the Draenor continent and slowly getting used to it, you would realize that they were a little cute. It would be weird. Duque was furious. The sonar was his treasure. When he was not sure that Vasht was Salagia, the sonar was his ultimate weapon against the Nagas. Who dares to put a group of little iguana people in my latest invention? There was only one answer. Duke's roar resounded through the entire shore. The hoof, who was standing not far away, heard Duke's roar. How could she not know that she had been exposed? Her whole body stiffened for a full second, as if she had been electrocuted. Then she shrank her head and actually wanted to sneak into the crowd and run away. The problem was that her mind was in a mess. She did not realize that she was surrounded by dwarves. She was more than a head taller than the dwarves. This stupid attempt to cover up made Duke even angrier. He immediately flashed over. "Ah!" Imriel screamed, turned around and galloped away. "Run. Why are you still running?" Duke was quick and grabbed the hoof's tail that was seriously lagging behind. The hoof's body stiffened again as if she had been electrocuted. Duke grabbed the hoof's waist and directly lifted her like a sack of rice. "Someone disassemble the sonar system. First, get rid of the little iguana people inside. I will first teach this idiot a lesson." The hoof screamed. The holy light education of a Karabo apprentice made her not dare to lie. No, I know I was wrong. I saw that your big iron box was empty and thought it was useless. It just so happened that Han Lin had pissed me off last time, so I wanted to give him some little iguana people. I really did not want to destroy your important new equipment." Who knew that Duke would get even angrier? Your King prank destroyed the latest invention of Marcus Future Technology Company, Limited. Begging for mercy is useless. This time, I must teach you an unforgettable lesson. Duke strode forward with the hoof on his shoulder and rushed into an empty storeroom by the shore. He sat down directly and pressed his knee against the hoof's lower abdomen. He grabbed her tail and fiercely spanked her butt. No. Don't spank me." Cried. She really cried. She had never been spanked in her entire life. Beside the storeroom, everyone was speechless. What was up with this combination? Even the Drenii garrison officer did not know what to say. They had also seen the advanced technology of the Alliance. To the Drenii universe, the technology of the Alliance was very basic. The problem was that the Drenii's own technology had been lost in the 25,000 years of escape. Because Drenii scientists had died in various accidents, most of the knowledge and technology had been lost. Many of the machines did not even know how to use, so their most reliable weapons were war hammers and holy light. Under such circumstances, being spanked was already a small punishment for their contact who had destroyed the advanced technology of the Alliance. According to the military law of the Alliance, if this Mark Dooku wanted to kill her, they would not know how to plead. 5 minutes later, Duke came out angrily, followed by a hoof who was covering her red and swollen butt. "Humph. Do you still dare to mess around?" Duke asked angrily. Sob. The hoof was crying. "I'm asking you a question." Sob. "I don't dare anymore." The hoof looked aggrieved, like a young wife who had just been harassed by a hooligan. At this moment, Duque still did not know that because he had spanked the hoof had actually covered her, but every time she saw him, perhaps in the hoof's eyes, the word hooligan had already been carved on Mark Dooku's forehead, and it could never be washed away. Chapter 1444. No dash. Wait, you're not going to spank me today, are you? I can work, but you have to swear that if I make a mistake today, you won't spank me. This was what happened when Duque met the hoof almost every day. A good hoof with a bright future. In theory, he could become an archbishop's hoof. Why did he become a crazy woman with persecutory delusions after being spanked once? Do you know how many players who had delusions about you in the past will be in despair now? Duke clutched his head in pain, his face full of black lines. Duque, are you not feeling well today? The hoof came over to ask Duque with concern, still clutching his butt. What the hell is this? Are you doing this out of kindness, or to piss me off? Or to piss me off out of kindness? Duque wanted to strangle Imriel. Duque could not take it anymore, and decided to have a showdown with the hoof. I, Mark Dooku, swear in the name of the weave demigod Duke Marcus that as long as you don't cause trouble and destroy the Alliance's cutting-edge equipment, I will definitely not punish you. Otherwise, I will let the weave demigod give Mark Dooku the most tragic destruction. Wow. Everyone was shocked. Because Dooku said this in the command center. When he said this, the two kings, Gavasht, and a bunch of lords with titles of generals all heard it. Dooku was controlling Mark, a delicate puppet. This was something only those who had the qualifications to attend the highest meeting of the Alliance knew. Bulang and Kudrin rolled their eyes, completely speechless. Alright, this guy was Dooku. Who the hell would go back on his word to punish himself? But the others did not know. The group of generals sighed at the seriousness of this guy's oath. Imriel was naturally the first to fall for it. Really? The hoof did not panic, his butt no longer hurt, and his legs became nimble. He came over eagerly. It's true. If Mark Dooku lied to you, then he's not human. A certain Dooku who was disguised as Mark swore that it had nothing to do with him. The hoof who did not know how sinister people's hearts could be believed. She was so moved that she almost burst into tears. She grabbed Mark's hand and said excitedly, "Okay, I was wrong about you. Master Willan said that my holy light theory is already the strongest, but I need more experience to elevate my spirit and make my holy light even purer. Mark, since you're the boss here, give me a mission. I've been watching those dwarves build the city all day. I'm going crazy from boredom." With a smile on his face, Dooku announced, "Imriel, lead your troops to attack Illidair's sentry post on the west side of this place. Just use your garrison, the Highland Warriors group, and 7 other organizations. That's a total of 2,000 people." Ah. The hoof was dumbfounded. What? Several generals jumped up, especially the dwarf Lord Yurgar, who was in charge of the frontline defense. Wait. Envoy, I object. Even if the Highland Warriors group is not directly under the jurisdiction of the Alliance, there's no reason for us to let a Karabo apprentice, who doesn't have a military rank in the Alliance, to command an army of 2,000 people. However, Dooku looked as if he had seen through everything and was unperturbed. Of course, although there probably wouldn't be any King of Draenor drama in the future, but gold would always shine. After transmigrating to the world of Azeroth for so long, Dooku was basically certain that those who shone brilliantly in the original history would not be too bad in terms of quality. The problem was that without the tempering given to the hoof in the original history, Dooku really did not dare to say whether she would grow to the height of the Archbishop. Anyway, it was Willan who gave the hoof a chance to help her grow, and Dooku did not mind him doing it once. Dooku ignored Yurgar and looked at his boss. "Your Majesty Kudrin Wildhammer, do you object to my decision?" "Object? Object my ass." To object to this doll named Mark was to object to Dooku, who was hiding in Karazhan on the other side of the world, and playing doll games. Kudrin was too full to be so stupid. Although the dwarves were more straightforward, how could a king be so stupid? Kudrin patted his High Lord on the back. "Didn't you complain all day that Illidan's men on the other side of the mountain often come over the mountain to cause trouble for you? Isn't this just right? Anyway, the Draenei can't help in the defensive line." Yurgar looked like he was choking. Since his boss said so, what else could he say? The Wildhammer dwarves were famous for their Griffin Air Force, but in fact they still had a lot of land forces. As close friends of the Bronzebeard dwarves, their infantry and cannons were also very good at coordinating. Many times, the Wildhammer dwarves' infantry almost followed the landing point of the cannonball and charged forward. Once they found that there were too many demons, they could directly stop and all lie down. They would wait for the cannoneers who were originally playing with the cannons to adjust the firing rate, then fire another round and then charge again. The Draenei who were not familiar with this tactic were really powerless and could only stare at the back. Rather than letting these Draenei rot, it was more practical to let them go and wipe out the surrounding enemy strongholds. Yurgar was also discouraged. Well, since the special envoy and my king have said so. At this time, Hoof finally reacted and should protest. Who knew, just as she sighed. She found that Dooku had already King asked for an official seal from Kudrin, and stamped it on the military order. Wait. I haven't agreed yet. Hoof's face turned pale. Please, this is a military order. You must complete it regardless of whether you agree or not. Otherwise you will be punished according to military law, Duque said confidently and matter-of-factly. When Hoof still wanted to say something, she was suddenly pulled back by her compatriots. Garrison Officer Murad was a determined warrior. He had helped the Draenei in countless worlds to avoid the Burning Legion's demon army time and time again. He was a role model among the Draenei. His unparalleled combat skills and thunderous methods to uphold justice had earned him the respect of his compatriots. After Shatrath City was safe, this battle-hardened garrison officer was sent by Willan to support the front lines as the representative of the Draenei. Murad spoke. Imriel, we carry the hopes of our compatriots and come to the front lines to fight against evil. If we can't even destroy one of the enemy's sentries, how can we talk about attacking the Black Temple, restoring it to the Temple of Karabair, and restoring its former glory? His words were completely politically correct. Hoof did not have any room to refute. Her superiors sold her out, and her compatriots sold her out. What else could she say? So, Hoof prepared to go to battle with tears in her eyes. Before she left, she gave Duke a tragic look. Her big, watery eyes were clearly saying, "Are you sure you're not sending me to my death?" Duque smiled. "No, I have faith in you, Hoof." Chapter 1445. Bulang and Kudran sent their men out of the command post after the Draenei's main force had set off. Bulang felt a little strange. Oh, is it worth it to torment a girl like this? Considering the Draenei's lifespan and the fact that they have a long adolescence, she's at most a 15-year-old human girl. Duque rubbed his chin, his expression a little playful. Whenever a country or a race is in danger, there will always be heroes who appear out of nowhere. It's just that some will grow up smoothly, while others will grow too slowly and die young. Not every hero is called Duke Marcus. Some heroes look like flowers in a greenhouse before they grow up, and can't withstand the wind and rain. But, you two take a look at Varian. Before the incident with Onyxia, he was nothing more than a well-educated nobleman. Duque's words implied that if it wasn't for his bloodline, Varian wouldn't even have the right to be king. Bulang and Kudran couldn't help but nod. If it wasn't for that cruel life as a gladiator, there wouldn't be a strong-willed Varian today. At the same time, because of Duque's existence and the reintegration of another Varian personality, Varian's excessive violent tendencies were suppressed. Now anyone could see that Varian was developing into an excellent leader, not only for Stormwind but also for the entire alliance. To put it bluntly, if Duque ascended to become a true god and had to abandon the alliance wouldn't lack a standard bearer. It wasn't that the queens of the various human kingdoms weren't outstanding, but they all lacked a kind of unity, a kind of boldness that other kings and leaders would approve of. As the most populous and powerful race in the current alliance, the core of the alliance was destined to be controlled by humans. Among the human kings, Kalia developed Lordaeron into a logistics country. Most of her energy was actually placed on the people's livelihood and armaments. In fact, after Mograine's retirement and Abendis's disappearance, Lordaeron didn't have a decent commander-in-chief. Tyrion Fordring was only suitable for heroic battles, not commanding. Alucia, if her throne wasn't taken away, she was more like a merchant lady. Jaina was capable, but her ability to see the bigger picture was lacking. On the surface, the Dalajan was in a power vacuum, but in reality, it was under Duque's direct rule. Stormguard's Danath Trollbane. At most he would become a king on the surface, but in reality, he would take charge of an entire region. Leading an army was already this silent man's greatest limit. After much consideration, in the end, Duque was no longer around, and only William, who had grown up, was the most reassuring. However, the two dwarves were still very pleased with Duque's unbiased way of cultivating the seedlings of the various races. Bulang said, "Speaking of which, are you really that confident in letting that little hussy go?" Duque rolled his eyes. "Even Mark Dooku can stand in front of you. What are you worried about?" The two dwarf kings immediately understood. Since Mark Dooku was here, it proved that this was the area covered by the magic net. As long as there was a strong enough magic net node, Duque could send over demigod-level powerhouses at any time, just like in the Serpent Shrine Cavern. The Wildhammer Fortress was the core stronghold for attacking the Shrine of Darkness, so the magic net here was of course of the highest level. The Illidari sentry post next door was just a small hill away. It had to be said that Duque had put in a lot of effort to groom Imriel. But the hussy herself didn't know. 5 kilometers away from the Wildhammer Fortress, the sky suddenly darkened. First, it was a smear of scarlet that gradually dyed the black sky, as if it was a sign of destruction. In a moment, the color began to turn into an extremely disgusting dark green. It was not difficult to imagine what kind of evil existed in the Illidari sentry post in front. Imriel thought about it again and again. He raised his arm twice and finally raised it. That was a signal to stop. The Drenii garrison stopped in unison, and so did the cooperating quasi-military organization. Garrison Officer Maralad, I think. Should we investigate first? Imriel said with a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Very wise decision, Commander Imriel. Obviously, his position should be higher. As a garrison officer, Maralad had the style of a soldier and the spirit of a warrior. He did not underestimate Imriel, this so-called commander who had come out of nowhere. Then, I'll leave it to you to arrange. Imriel secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Maralad waved his hand and made a gesture. Immediately, the Highland Warriors and another organization called the Aurora Group sent people over. Maralad ordered meticulously. Thomas, Jared, Commander Imriel, we need to investigate as much as possible without alerting the enemy. Send out your best men. Not only do we need binoculars to observe, but we also need an accurate count of the enemy's numbers and types. It would be better if we could estimate the general strength of the enemy. You have an hour. Understood. The Drenii's hooves made too much noise. In addition to their taller bodies, they might be good warriors or good paladins, but they were definitely not good thieves. In terms of investigation, the Drenii were no match for the dwarf thieves and elven thieves. The situation was quickly reported back. There were not many enemies at the sentry post, only about 100. The problem was that the enemy was very strong. 30 Illidari terror emissaries, 63 Illidari commandos, the great demon Lothras, the Queen of Pain Gabrisa. The information is so accurate? Although Imriel had never led troops before, seeing such a detailed report, she still felt as if she had been deceived. Thomas hurriedly explained. No, Commander, you've misunderstood. We took our seats according to the three-dimensional images in the Encyclopedia of Draenor Demons that the higher-ups gave us. After saying that, Thomas kicked the leg of the mage next to him. The guy grunted and hurriedly took out a projection crystal. Immediately, the image and description of the demons appeared on it. It was clear which ones were the terror emissaries, and which ones were the commandos. Where did you get this information? Maralad was shocked. Thomas shrugged. You'll have to ask the big shots of the Alliance who are above the rank of Major General. Perhaps Special Envoy Mark Dooku will know. For some reason this person, who was destined to be unable to rely on Duque due to his lack of talent, thought of the mysterious Mark Dooku again. Now Mark had somehow become a special envoy of the Alliance. This time, Thomas guessed correctly. The information came from Duque. Ever since Duque forced the Eridar twins to surrender, all kinds of information had been sent to Karazhan. Chapter 1446. In order to avoid being discovered, the cautious Gemini would of course not give Duque any important information. However, they did not feel guilty at all for selling the scum who had surrendered to Illidan. There were so many demons in the twisting nether that there were hundreds of millions of them. Originally, these low-level demons who were not directly under a lord would not be taken seriously, so the Gemini sold them to their heart's content. His background was completely exposed. From their appearance to their level, to their special skills. God damn it, they had everything. Anyway, if there was anything, they could just say that the infernal affairs had stolen the information from 10,000 years ago. After all, demons who could become elites and above basically had a lifespan of more than 10,000 years. Imriel saw that the other side had a smurf boss and an elite. She estimated and frowned. Marad was the only heroic powerhouse on her side who could fight. If they rushed in recklessly, it was very likely that they would suffer heavy casualties. Do we have any reinforcements? At this moment, Imriel's face was no longer as lively as before. It was full of seriousness. After all, she was carrying the lives of more than 1,000 of her compatriots on her shoulders. If she made a mistake in her command, it would be the end of these compatriots. Yes, Marad replied. The higher-ups have prepared artillery support for us from the flying warships. Since they are not directly under the alliance, once we call for reinforcements, once we win, a portion of the merit will be given to them. Call. Imriel seemed very decisive. Compared to the illusory merit and fighting against demons who would not really die, she valued the lives of her compatriots more. At this moment, Duque, who was observing Imriel in Karazhan, rubbed his chin with a very playful expression on his face. Master, do you think this little Drenii girl is very promising? Vashti, who was standing beside him, smiled like a flower. Do you want me to help Master teach her a few moves? Help Master cultivate a capable female subordinate. Duque rolled his eyes at Vashti, his eyes full of warning. Vashti suddenly stopped talking. Vashti was indeed a capable and good maid. The problem was that this girl was born in the most corrupt High Elven palace, and had been in the deep sea for almost 10,000 years. Many things would become complicated because of her habitual thinking. Duque didn't want such a good seedling to be led astray by Vashti. How should he put it? With him, Duque, there definitely wouldn't be any king of Draenor. Using his own methods to nurture Imriel, who was supposed to be successful, the sense of accomplishment was no less than building a complete and majestic fortress with his bare hands. Duque said, "If you're that free, go prepare the second phase of the plan. If you really fail, I'll skin you alive." Yes, yes, yes. I will obey Master's orders. Seeing that Duque was in a bad mood, Vashti tactfully lifted her white maid skirt. She did not leave, but stood quietly to the side. Vashti noticed that Vanessa, who was always in the way of her and Duque's game of a bite of the tongue, was no longer there. In the Moon Shadow Valley, Imriel's expression was very interesting, because the person who popped out of the magic communication mirror was a Pandaren. Wahahaha. Is this the first time you've seen a Pandaren? We don't live on the main continent of Azeroth, so it's normal for the Drenii who have just joined the Alliance not to have seen us. Alright, enough with the nonsense, dear Commander Imriel. The Stormwinds Special Experimental Unit, Royal Brothel Team, is at your service. At this moment, Hoof spat. Although she knew that those organizations that were officially recognized or subordinate to the Alliance had all kinds of strange names, she did not expect that other than the reliable Highland Warriors team, there would be such unreliable ones. What? Hoof's eyes widened as she stared at the slightly wretched Pandaren in the communication mirror. Sorry, Sir Commander, although our 3 flying warships are all unofficially equipped warships, the name Royal Brothel Team was accidentally mentioned by the great commander, Duke Marcus. We all thought it was very good, so we used it. After a quick and simple explanation from the captain with the strange name of Nicholas June Muki, Imriel barely knew the origin of the Royal Brothel. Since ancient times, in the official literature and records of all the human navies, every warship was described as a female she. So every ship was a ship girl. But you have to think about it this way. When you meet these cute girls, do they keep saying that this is your wife, and that is your wife all the time? Is that right? Can't their wives be OXX? If you play with these ships alone, then they are your harem. But ships can't be operated by one person. That means you are not the only one playing, so this is a brothel. June Muki waved his black bear paw and said loudly, so, the great commander, Duke Marcus, said on the deck of the stupid Queen Ilia, that this is the great royal brothel, not an air force that you can come and go as you please. At this moment, Imriel was devastated. She really did not know that humans and Pandaren would have such strange fetishes. In her young heart, a big warning exclamation mark was drawn on the commander of the Alliance whom she had never met, but who gave her an extremely unreliable feeling. At the same time, whether it was Duque in Karazhan or Mark Dooku in the Wildhammer Fortress, because of the telepathic synchronization, they both flipped the table in front of them. Volsh *T. I said at that time. This is the Royal Air Force, Not a brothel that you can come and go as you please. Someone come. When this guy called Junmyuki comes back, give him an oxygen tank, and let him swim in a cesspool for an hour. If Duque was not the leader of the alliance, this kind of thing could really be a big deal. The royal family and the royal family were two different things. Royal was a title that only Thoradin the Great Arather Empire could use. Of course, after the people below heard that Duque had settled multiple queens, they also jokingly called Duque the Emperor. If it was not the Emperor, who could settle multiple queens? It was another matter to say that the royal air force of the Storm family was a brothel. Duque hated this group of people with big mouths. Of course, Junmyuki was definitely not the only one who talked nonsense, but he could only kill the chicken to warn the monkey. In fact, the so-called royal brothel team was a special combination of 3 ships: the special experimental flying battleship, Warweary, the stupid Queen Ilia, and the flying battlecruiser, Hood. These 3 ships abandoned the traditional multi-story cannons of the Alliance's previous flying battleships and sea battleships. They went from pursuing firepower density to a more modern firing mode, where only the top deck had cannons. Chapter 1447. On one hand, the cutting-edge rotating turrets allowed the warships to carry larger caliber cannons with a wider firing range. The traditional multi-layered cannons could only aim at a pitiful 15 degrees. On the other hand, there were only a few small caliber cannons at the front and rear of the ship. On the other hand, sealing the lower deck was more beneficial to the survival of the crew. The open multi-layered cannons increased the firepower density, but at the same time, it made the warship more fragile. As long as it hit a certain area, it could easily spread the damage to the armory and cause a chain of explosions. In other words, the cannons that were filled with cannons were like a living target for the armory. As the war continued, under Duque's special reminder, the Alliance also noticed a situation. Creating the cutting-edge cannons took a short time, but to train a qualified adult soldier, there had to be an adult, and it had to be a well-educated adult. Illiterates could not handle cannons, especially the new cannons with a firing calibration system. Even with the help of the system to calculate the trajectory, there were many times when the system was not accurate, and the cannoneer's experience had to be used to correct it. This time, the new flying warships were used as test subjects. All 3 warships were equipped with unique cannons. Warweary's sharpshooter system had the Alliance's cutting-edge tactical auxiliary aiming system, which was inclined towards long-range precision attacks. Hood's Glory system was inclined towards continuous firepower and wide-area damage. The specially equipped chain reloading mechanism made the cannons more automatic. And Ilya's Queen's Command system was similar to Duque's radar system before he transmigrated. She would scan the entire battlefield repeatedly and collect all kinds of information on the battlefield. She would then link it with War Weariness and Hood's fire control system, hoping to increase the firepower, accuracy, and even the dodging rate of the warships. As for the performance of these 3 cutting-edge warships, it needed to be tested in actual combat. Bringing them to the main battlefield was something that the Alliance would only do when it was on the verge of destruction. If the conditions were right, a low-intensity battle would be a very suitable experiment. The Drenii would not use cannons to coordinate, because they had never seen it before. Obviously, Iril was an exception. As the first Drenii to follow a certain Dew who went by the alias Mark, Iril could be said to have seen the world. She was well aware of the terrifying power of modern artillery. After looking at the sketch sketched out by the scout, and carefully asking about the terrain of that place, Zhang Xian's eyes lit up. Imriel gave an order. Thomas, I need your best archers to take the bottles of holy water and shoot them at these points. Retreat immediately after shooting the arrows. The Illidari outpost was actually built on the ruins of a Drenii palace. There were broken tiles everywhere in the ruins, and only a few houses had tiles to cover their heads. As a sentinel to guard the Moon Shadow Valley, there were not many people stationed here. It was purely because there was an energy node here that Illidan had ordered the demons to set up a sentry post here. Not long after, a few arrows were shot into the open space of Illidar's sentry post. The Illidari commandos, who were actually demon guards, revealed puzzled expressions. They weren't very intelligent, so they couldn't understand why an arrow with holy light would be shot into the empty space. Of course, this didn't stop them from reacting quickly. Enemy attack. Mournful shouts in the Abyss Devil language resounded throughout the entire sentry post. Almost all the demons rushed out with weapons in their hands. But there was nothing. Should we give chase? A commando asked the Terror Emissary. The Terror Emissary was a dreadlord that wasn't strong enough, but in a small sentry post like this, the Terror Emissary was already the commander. After spreading out his senses, he still couldn't sense any traces of the enemy. Finally, the Terror Emissary ordered, "Stay alert." As he hadn't directly confronted the Alliance before, he didn't know that at that moment, 12,000 meters away, 3 warships hovering in the air were in an uproar. "The coordinates have been transmitted," an aide shouted. The Pandaren captain, Junmuki, waved his large claw. "Compare the terrain data, and try to stabilize the hull. Activate the auxiliary correction system. Wind direction 12. 3 degrees to the east, level 3 wind." Alright. The calibration balloon has been released. Everyone listen up. The main cannon will fire in 60 seconds. In a small valley 2 kilometers away from the Illidari outpost, Imriel was extremely nervous. She was wearing a brand new armor, which in theory could protect her body better than her previous leather armor. However, she knew that in front of demons that were stronger than the beastmen, her superior grade plate armor was like paper. The only thing they could rely on was the support of the Alliance's cannons. Imriel was very afraid that the enemy would find them and suddenly rush out to engage them in hand-to-hand combat. If that was the case, the Alliance's warships would not be able to open fire under such circumstances. 5 minutes felt as long as 5 centuries. Finally, there seemed to be thunder in the distant sky, and there was a muffled sound. Soon, every single soldier of the Alliance army could hear it even more clearly. It was the scream of death that came from the sky. The huge cannonball at high speed was like a burning meteor, whistling through the sky as it rushed towards the ground. There was no chance for the demons at the Illidari outpost to escape. The violent and terrifying cannonball had already exploded at the outpost. The strong flash meant that the explosion caused by the new gunpowder was ruthlessly and efficiently crushing all living beings within the range of the explosion. It was as if the earth had been punched by the invisible fist of God, and a huge crater similar to that of a meteorite appeared on the ground. Debris and mud splattered in all directions, and the aftermath of the explosion destroyed everything in its path. The demons of the Burning Legion had fire attributes, so the explosion did not cause much damage to them. Originally, they would only receive damage from the impact, but the gunpowder had some Nara's holy light substance, so it was a different story. Instinctively afraid of the holy light, the demons that were not directly hit by the cannonball fled in all directions. At this time, a few terrifying Illidari emissaries stood up from the crater. They cursed in Eridar. "Calm down. Idiots. Find the enemy immediately." Their efforts were destined to be in vain. An attack over 12,000 meters away was already terrifying enough. Not to mention that the Royal Kiln team was hovering on the other side of the mountain, and the cannonball flew over the top of the mountain in a parabola. There was not a single demon that had a perception of 12 kilometers away. They could at most roughly sense which direction the cannonball was coming from. They also did not know that the cannonball just now was just a test shot. In order to adjust the shooting parameters for the subsequent cannonball. Chapter 1448. Half a minute later, there was an earth-shattering explosion. The energy from the high explosive shells tore the entire Illidari outpost apart, and a few huge chunks of earth the size of hills were blown into the sky. Looking at the demonic limbs and flesh flying in the sky, the Drenii troops who were lying in ambush 2 kilometers away were completely speechless. Imriel felt the tremors from the ground, and she found herself crying. She could not help but pray in fear and anxiety. Even though the target was the Drenii's nemesis, she was still very uncomfortable. The continuous bombardment lasted for 3 minutes, and when it stopped, there was only dead silence. Imriel smiled bitterly. By the way, do we even have a chance to fight? Merritt said firmly. It is the commander's duty to confirm the results of the battle. Imriel made a decision. Then let's go. If there are still demons who are not dead, it is our duty to give them the final blow. After saying that, Hoof turned around and gave an order to the army's mages. Tell the Royal Kiln team to get ready. In 10 minutes, we will need to coordinate with the infantry cannons. Running 2 kilometers in 10 minutes was not considered steep, and it was considered a relatively fast-armed march. But Imriel had no choice. At first, she did not dare to let her troops within a kilometer. After all, the new cannons did not hit the enemy for the first time. Instead, a stray bullet took the lives of an entire team of Drenii infantry. This was not something unusual. When they reached 500 meters away from the outpost, the hill that they saw through the binoculars had been shaved off a few meters. As expected, not all of the evil demons were dead. At a place visible to the naked eye, a rift tore open in the nearby air, and some horrible things rushed out of it impatiently. Winged demons and bewitching succubi. They roared angrily, waving yellow-green demonic flames and powerful magical energy in their hands. Fire. With the first experience, Imriel was more confident in the accuracy of the 3 battleships. After another round of earth-shattering explosions, the Drenii troops, under the leadership of Merritt, launched an all-out attack on the remaining demons. In the name of the Holy Light, die demons. This was one of the few Drenii elites left. Many Drenii were sacrificed when they were escaping from the demon hunters sent by Kil'jaeden. Although veterans who could live for more than 5,000 years were not as rare as phoenix feathers and Chelan horns, there weren't many of them either. Mal Lad was one of them. There weren't many of his former comrades left. Those who gathered around him were all elites who had participated in the previous war with the orcs. They stood guard on the bridge outside Shatrath City, facing the terrifying orcs that were 100 times stronger than them without any fear. Even the insufferably arrogant Blackrock clan had once suffered defeat in front of them. This was an army forged from steel. Every single one of them had a will of steel. Under the name of the Holy Light, they were willing to sacrifice their lives for the Holy Light and their comrades at any time. They sang a hymn unique to the Drenii and charged into the center of the dust-filled battlefield, their bodies shining with golden light without turning back. Imriel could have stayed behind, but she chose to merge herself into the vanguard and followed closely behind Mal Lad. She held a short hammer with a shiny purple head in her right hand and a nimble oval-shaped shield in her left. She took a lunge step that was unique to the Drenii's calves and rushed towards the enemy. In the midst of the dust, she saw a satyr struggling on the ground. Although it was heavily injured, with one of its left legs missing in the bombardment, it still fiercely used its claws to tear off the entire left arm of a Drenii warrior. Oh! The male Drenii warrior screamed in pain and launched a counterattack against the satyr, but was blocked by a claw. The result of countless combat training was that Imriel's movements would not change at all. She kicked hard and flew forward like an arrow. Seeing the opportunity, she swung her war hammer mercilessly towards the satyr's head. At that most appropriate moment, the seal of command exploded, causing Imriel's hammer strike to have additional holy damage. Imriel was desperate. At that moment, she really did not think about the consequences if she did not hit the satyr. In fact, she almost missed. The satyr tilted his head at the moment when his head was about to be hit. If she had not subconsciously tilted her hammer, the hammer would have probably brushed past the satyr's ear by a few millimeters. Fortunately, with that tilt, she felt as if she had hit something heavy. In the eyes of this Karabeir apprentice who had never been on the battlefield, a quarter of the satyr's ferocious face was blown away. The scene of flesh and blood splattering, and the scene of brains splattering was probably something she would not forget for a long time. Strangely, she had never heard that some warriors would feel nauseous after their first kill. She was somewhat calm, and even a little excited. I did it. I really did it. I have passed judgment on those fallen ones who persecuted my people. Hoof screamed in her heart. Her nimble eyes darted around, and immediately caught a glimpse of another demonic guard who was trying to kill a human swordsman not far away. Without hesitation, Sanction flew out of her hand. The holy energy flowed along her hand and directly hit the demon's brain, causing it to be paralyzed for a short 3 seconds. Taking advantage of this rare opportunity, the human swordsman roared and swung the giant sword in his hand, chopping off the head of the burly demon that was half a body taller than him. In the Wildhammer Fortress, the big shots who saw this scene through the magic surveillance screen were amazed. Bulang said, "Not bad, this little hoof. If not for her inexperience at the beginning, I would not have been able to confirm that this was her first time on the battlefield." Kudrin took a sip of liquor. This talent does not seem to be any worse than a Bendis back then. As a new recruit, this was already a very high evaluation. Marshal Abendis was never known for his strength. That was because he had the 5 Silver Saints above him. There were too many top-notch people, so he was forced to be rated as a second-rate knight. Kudrin's evaluation of Imriel was not low. Duque smiled faintly. The better Imriel performed, the more it proved that his foresight was unique. In his mind, Hoof was an important healer knight in the hero squad in the future. Of course, if he could develop her commanding talent, that would be even better. To be honest, before today he really did not think that she would have this bit of talent in coordination with the infantry. You're tuning into the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.